In the quiet cradle of time, before the first footsteps and long after the last stars will fade, there stands a tree. Not just any tree, but the tree that holds the fabric of existence in its roots and reaches a tree that remembers, that dreams, that breathes with the heartbeat of the cosmos. This is the story of Yggdrasil, the world tree, and the 9 realms that rest in its branches and roots. So find a comfortable place. Let your eyes grow heavy. Let your breath slow. And allow yourself to drift gently into a world older than myth, deeper than time, where gods walk among leaves and fate is carved into bark. In the quiet hush before time began, before the first star blinked into existence or the wind ever stirred across the void, there was only Ginnungagap, an immense, yawning chasm of nothingness. This primordial gap stretched endlessly between 2 great elemental realms, Muspelheim, the blazing land of fire, and Niflheim, the realm of ice and mist. It was in the delicate balance between these opposing forces that something extraordinary began to take shape, a stirring deep within the void. From Muspelheim came surging heat and flame, wild and untamed. From Niflheim came frost and biting cold, slow and relentless. When fire met ice at the edges of Ginnungagap, the ice began to melt and drip, giving birth to the first living being, Ymir, the primordial frost giant. From Ymir's sweat and the layers of rime and flame arose others, strange and mighty beings who would form the first lineage of giants. But Ymir was not alone. From the ice also emerged Audumla, a great cosmic cow who nourished Ymir with her milk. Audumla herself survived by licking the salty ice blocks, and from them she uncovered a figure, Buri, the forefather of the gods. Buri would eventually father Bor, who in turn fathered 3 sons, Odin, Vili, and Ve. These 3 brothers would become the first Aesir gods, powerful, cunning, and destined to reshape the cosmos. Odin and his brothers saw the chaos and wildness of the giants and knew it could not last. They rose against Ymir and slew him, and from his massive body they crafted the world. His flesh became the soil, his bones the mountains, his blood the seas and rivers. From his skull they made the sky, held up by 4 dwarfs, Northri, Southri, Austri, and Vestri, north, south, east, and west. The spark of Muspelheim became the sun and stars, while the mist of Niflheim fed the rivers and clouds. In the center of it all, they placed Yggdrasil, the world tree. Yggdrasil was no ordinary tree. It was a towering ash whose branches reached into the heavens and whose roots delved into the deepest, darkest parts of existence. It stood as the axis mundi, the sacred spine of the universe, connecting all realms across time and space. It held together the 9 realms in its vast branches and roots, keeping the balance between gods, giants, elves, dwarfs, and men. The roots of Yggdrasil stretched deep, one into Asgard, the realm of the gods, another into Jotunheim, the land of the giants, and a third into Niflheim, near the well of Hervogelmir, where the dragon Nidhogg gnawed at its base, forever threatening the tree's stability. Each root drank from a sacred well, wells of wisdom, fate, and primal force. The first of these wells was Urdarbrunn, the well of Urd, from which the Norns, mysterious weavers of destiny, drew water to nourish the tree and shape the lives of all beings. The second was Mimir's well, located in Jotunheim, a source of immense knowledge and clarity. The third was Vergelmir, the roaring cauldron of icy waters, from which all rivers flowed. Birds nested in its branches, and creatures roamed its bark. At the top perched an eagle, wise and far-seeing, while between its eyes sat a hawk named Vedrfolnir. From root to branch, a squirrel named Ratatoskr scurried back and forth carrying messages and insults between the eagle above and Nidhogg below. The tree was alive with whispers and motion, a living conduit between all things. It was said that the gods would gather daily beneath Yggdrasil's boughs, near the Well of Erd, to hold counsel and to judge. They would sit in quiet thought, their minds brushing against the tapestry of fate as spun by the Norns, Erd, Verdandi, and Skuld, who represented the past, the present, and the future. It was through Yggdrasil that the gods understood the passage of time and the impermanence of their own power. Yet Yggdrasil, for all its majesty, was not eternal. It groaned under the weight of destiny, shuddered beneath the steps of the gods and beasts that trod its limbs, and suffered the eternal gnawing of Nidhogg. Even gods whispered of the day when the tree would tremble for the last time, when the 9 realms would shake and fall into fire and ice once again. But for now, it stood, proud and vast, a sacred bridge between realms, a living symbol of the Norse cosmos. And so begins our journey through the mysteries of Yggdrasil, a tale woven with gods and giants, with wisdom and battle, with time and memory. Let us now explore each of the 9 realms it binds together, and the beings who dwell within them. The first of the 9 realms that Yggdrasil touches is Asgard, the shining fortress of the Aesir gods. High above the middle world, Asgard is a realm of golden halls, endless feasts, and divine power. It is here that Odin, the All-Father, rules from his majestic seat in Valaskjalf, a hall whose roof is made of silver, where he watches over all the realms through his throne, Hidskjalf. His 2 ravens, Hugin and Munin, thought and memory, fly out each day to gather news from the 9 realms and whisper it back into his ear. The gods of Asgard live lives of might and meaning, warriors, seers, and builders of fate. Among them is Thor, god of thunder, protector of Midgard, who wields the mighty hammer Mjolnir and rides across the sky in a chariot pulled by 2 goats. There is also Frigg, Odin's wife and queen of the gods, who knows the fate of all but speaks it to no one. Balder, the most beautiful and beloved of all gods, radiates light and purity, while Loki, the trickster, brings mischief and chaos in equal measure. The Aesir dwell in magnificent halls like Valhalla, where the souls of worthy warriors feast eternally, and Gladsheim, where they hold council. These gods are not all-knowing or eternal. They age, they feel sorrow, they prepare for war, and they await their doom at Ragnarok, the end of all things. But within Asgard lies a sense of purpose, a place where honor and courage are prized above all. From Asgard, one can travel across Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge, which arcs down to Midgard. This shimmering path, guarded by Heimdall, the watchman of the gods, connects the divine with the mortal. Heimdall, with ears so keen he can hear grass grow, and eyes that see 100 leagues, never sleeps. Ever ready to sound his horn, Gjallarhorn, should danger approach. Beyond Asgard lies Vanaheim, the second of the god realms, home of the Vanir, gods of fertility, nature, and prosperity. Unlike the warlike Aesir, the Vanir are attuned to the earth and its cycles. They are seers, bringers of peace and bountiful harvests. The Vanir once warred with the Aesir in a conflict that threatened to divide the heavens, but in time, peace was made. And as a sign of truce, gods were exchanged between the realms. Njord, god of the sea and wind, came to Asgard, bringing his twin children, Freyr and Freya. Freyr became a god of peace and plenty, ruling over sunshine and rain, while Freya, radiant and fierce, became the goddess of love, beauty, and battle. She rode a chariot drawn by cats and claimed half the fallen warriors for her own hall, says Hrungnir. These Vanir gods, though now part of the Aesir, still carry the essence of their own realm, wild, green, and full of life's mystery. Below these divine realms lies Midgard, the world of humanity, held in place by Yggdrasil's trunk. Midgard is encircled by a great ocean, within which dwells Jormungandr, the world serpent, a monstrous child of Loki who wraps around the earth and bites his own tail. Midgard is connected to Asgard only by Bifrost, a realm of fleeting lives, of love and war, of struggle and song. Humans live unaware of the deeper forces at play, yet their actions echo in the halls of the gods. Heroes rise from Midgard, chosen by fate to join Odin in Valhalla or Freyja in her field of the slain. Though seemingly small and powerless, humanity's choices ripple outward, touching the great tree and the fabric of destiny itself. Beneath Midgard lies Svartalfheim, also known as Nidavellir, the realm of dwarfs, master craftsmen, and secretive folk who live deep within the earth. It is said that the dwarfs were born from the blood and bones of Ymir, shaped in the dark like maggots, before being gifted with reason and skill. They forged the greatest treasures in the Norse cosmos: Odin's spear Gungnir, Thor's hammer Mjolnir, and Freyr's ship Skidbladnir, which could fold to fit in a pocket yet always catch the wind. Their halls are carved into stone, lit by glowing gems and molten fire. The dwarfs are wise, but not always kind, often keeping to themselves unless enticed by gold or craft. They know the secrets of the deep, of metals and magic, of runes and fate, and though they rarely leave their realm, their work is felt across all others. To the east of Midgard lies Jotunheim, the land of the giants, wild, mountainous, and chaotic. It is a place where great beings roam, descendants of Ymir, born of ice and strength. The Jotnar are not all enemies of the gods. Some are wise, others cruel, some beautiful, others grotesque. They are old as time, forces of nature incarnate, often in conflict with the Aesir, but sometimes bound by kinship or fate. It is here that Mimir's well lies, guarded by the severed but still living head of Mimir himself, which Odin consults for wisdom. Odin once sacrificed an eye to drink from this well, gaining insight into all things, a sign of the depth of sacrifice required to truly understand the world. And so, as Yggdrasil's branches spread and its roots reach through the realms, we see not a static cosmos, but a living, breathing organism, ever shifting, ever enduring. The 9 realms exist not in isolation, but in a delicate dance of light and shadow, of fire and frost, of life and death. Let us now journey deeper into Alfheim, the radiant home of the light elves and beyond. High above the mortal world, where the air shimmers with an ethereal glow and music hums like wind through crystal leaves, lies Alfheim, the realm of the light elves. These beings, radiant and graceful, are said to be even more beautiful than the sun, a race so fair and luminous that the gods themselves hold them in reverence. Ruled by Freyr, the Vanir god of peace and fertility, Alfheim is a realm of perpetual twilight, not darkness, but a serene glow where time moves slowly and nature thrives in perfect harmony. The Light Elves are beings of healing and inspiration, of art and wisdom. They dance through sunbeams and whisper into the dreams of mortals, bringing moments of beauty, poetry, and vision. Yet not all elves are light, for in contrast to Alfheim, there exists another, more hidden realm, Svartalfheim, or sometimes called the world of the Dark Elves. Though often confused with the dwarves, these dark elves dwell in the shadows, beneath the surface of reality, in places where the sun never reaches. They are secretive, and some say dangerous, not out of malice, but because they walk the edges between creation and illusion. They guard ancient knowledge and powerful runes, rarely seen unless they wish to be. Between these two lies the balance of light and shadow, of seen and unseen. And just as the Light Elves inspire dreams and clarity, the Dark Elves test resolve and awaken the hidden parts of the soul. Deeper still, beneath even the lower roots of Yggdrasil, lies the frigid and haunting realm of Niflheim, a place of ice, mist, and silence. Niflheim is one of the oldest realms, a domain where rivers of poison and frozen fog wind through a land untouched by light. It is here, near the well of Hervergilmir, that the dragon Nidhogg endlessly gnaws at the roots of the great tree, seeking to bring decay and collapse to all of creation. Niflheim is not entirely barren, however. It is also the location of Helheim, the land of the dead, ruled by Hel, daughter of Loki. Half living, half dead, Hel presides over those who died not in glory but in quietness, the sick, the old, the forgotten. Her realm is not one of fire and torment, but of cold stillness, a place of shadows and memories where souls wander, remembering life. Helheim lies far from the warmth of Asgard or the fire of Muspelheim. It is not punishment, merely the natural place for those who passed without fanfare. Here, the souls rest, neither tormented nor celebrated, simply existing in the endless mist. And then there is Muspelheim, the realm of fire, wild, bright, and destructive. It is the opposite of Niflheim in every way. A land of molten rivers and towering flame, where the air burns and light bends in waves of heat. Muspelheim is ruled by Surtur, the fire giant, who wields a flaming sword and stands at the edge of time, destined to rise at Ragnarok and set the world ablaze. Muspelheim's energy is raw and ancient. It was the fire of this realm that first met the ice of Niflheim to begin the birth of the cosmos. Fire and ice, chaos and stillness. Together they gave rise to all things. Surtur's realm is not evil, but it is wild, untamed and ever raging, a force not to be reasoned with, but to be reckoned with. So now, all 9 realms are revealed, each connected by Yggdrasil, the great ash tree, whose branches reach above and roots reach below. Asgard, Vanaheim, Alfheim above, Midgard in the middle, Jotunheim, Svartalfheim, Niflheim, Helheim, and Muspelheim, around and below. Each realm plays a part in the grand story of existence. Each holds its own beings, its own truths, and its own fate. The world tree binds them not just physically, but spiritually. It is said that every leaf on Yggdrasil contains a star. Every creak of its branches signals a shift in destiny. The gods care for it, the Norns water it, and the creatures who dwell within it help spin the rhythms of the cosmos. But even now, Yggdrasil is under constant strain. Nidhogg gnaws at its roots, serpents slither around its base, and the winds of fate rustle through its leaves. The squirrel Ratatoskr runs from branch to root, stirring conflict, passing words of scorn between the eagle above and the dragon below. Even the gods are not immune to the whispers carried along the bark. Whispers of war, of endings, of rebirth. Still, the tree stands, tall and proud, its bark silver gray, its leaves evergreen. It weaves through all stories, all worlds, all beings. A symbol of the interconnectedness of life, death, and all the mysteries in between. As we prepare to explore the individual stories of the beings who dwell within these realms, let us remember that Yggdrasil is not just a tree. It is the very spine of the Norse cosmos, the source and the center of all that was, is, and ever shall be. In the heart of the nine realms, Yggdrasil continued its silent vigil, stretching skyward and delving deep into the unknown. Among the branches and roots, time itself seemed different. Ancient, sacred, woven with the runes that whispered stories older than language. The gods, mortals, and beings of all realms shared one truth. They were all tied to this tree. And now, we turn toward those who weave the strands of destiny that flow through its mighty trunk, the Norns. At the base of Yggdrasil, near the well of Urd, the Norns dwell. Urd, Verdandi, and Skuld, past, present, and future. These three mysterious beings are neither goddesses nor mortals, but something beyond, ancient and eternal. They sit beneath the boughs, casting their gaze into the waters of fate, dipping their hands into the well, and carving runes into the bark of the world tree. Runes that define the destinies of all living beings. They are often silent, yet their presence commands awe. Each day they water the roots of Yggdrasil with the pure waters of the well, mixed with white clay, ensuring that the tree does not wither. This sacred duty keeps the tree strong, but it also means the Norns see all, from the rise of empires to the fall of gods. The gods themselves fear them, for even Odin cannot escape what the Norns have written. They do not judge or intervene. They simply record. And in their recordings, the universe moves forward. It is said that when a child is born, the Norns arrive to determine the course of their life, to mark how long it will be, what trials will arise, and where joy and sorrow will meet. Some mortals prayed to them, others feared them, but all understood. The Norns did not change fate. They only revealed it. Odin, in his relentless pursuit of wisdom, once hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and 9 nights, wounded by his own spear, without food or drink. It was a sacrifice to himself, in search of the runes, the sacred symbols of power and understanding. As he dangled from the tree, suspended between life and death, he saw the runes, glowing and shifting. At the end of the 9th night, the runes revealed themselves to him, and he fell, reborn with their knowledge etched into his soul. These runes became the foundation of magic, prophecy, and language. They allowed Odin to see further, to command power through spoken word and carved symbol. With them, he could shape fate, or at least try to. But even with the runes, Odin knew, some things cannot be changed. Some destinies, once written by the Norns, are unbreakable. Among the runes was one of protection, one of destruction, one of wisdom, one of love. Each had a purpose, a weight, a consequence. They became tools for gods and mortals alike, inscribed onto weapons, armor, stones, and flesh. But the true meaning of each rune, its deepest power, remained known only to those who had given up everything to see. While Odin gained wisdom from Yggdrasil, the creatures within the tree continued their eternal roles. The great eagle perched atop the highest branches watched the heavens and winds. Between its eyes sat Vedrfolnir, the hawk, ever vigilant. Their eyes pierced through all illusion, seeing across realms, into the heart of storms and the intentions of kings. Far below, Nidhogg sank its teeth into the deepest root, endlessly chewing, seeking to bring rot and ruin to the tree. It fed on the corpses of the dishonored dead and dreamed of the day the tree would fall. And between the two, the squirrel, Ratatoskr, ever eager, ever mischievous, raced up and down Yggdrasil's bark, delivering messages, many twisted or insulting. From the eagle to the dragon and back again, he was the chaos between order and decay, the embodiment of petty strife and spiteful gossip. These creatures, while small compared to the gods, held their own significance. The eagle represented foresight, the hawk precision, the dragon decay, the squirrel disharmony. Together, they illustrated the delicate tension of the cosmos, always on the edge, always shifting. As we explore the 9 realms further, we begin to understand that they are more than places. They are reflections of states of being. Asgard is aspiration and rule. Vanaheim is harmony and life. Alfheim is light and inspiration. Midgard is balance and mortality. Jotunheim is chaos and challenge. Svartalfheim is creation and secrecy. Niflheim is stillness and memory. Helheim is acceptance and rest. Muspelheim is passion and destruction. Each realm touches the lives of those who dwell within Yggdrasil's embrace, and each is preparing, knowingly or unknowingly, for the great storm to come. For though Yggdrasil stands, it is not unshakable. There are signs, cracks in the bark, dreams that shift into nightmares, stars that flicker and go dark. Even the Norns speak less and sigh more. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, lies ahead. But before the end, there are still stories to be told and wisdom to be gathered beneath the leaves of the world tree. The 9 realms, though vast and distinct, are not isolated. Paths crisscross between them, visible only to those attuned to magic or fate. Some are guarded, like Bifrost, which connects Midgard to Asgard, a dazzling bridge of light only the gods may tread freely. Others are hidden, ancient tunnels beneath mountains, or shimmering portals in still lakes. Travelers between the realms are rare, and such journeys are never without consequence. One such traveler was Odin himself, the Allfather. In his unquenchable thirst for wisdom, journeyed to every corner of Yggdrasil's reach. He sought not conquest, but understanding. Not just knowledge of the runes, but of the heart of each realm and of the beings who dwelled there. He spoke with giants and elves, with dwarfs and dragons. He bargained, sacrificed, and sometimes deceived, always with the goal of peering deeper into the tapestry of existence. It was on one such journey that Odin came to the realm of the dwarfs, Svartalfheim. Here, beneath the roots of mountains, in halls lit by lava and jewel fire, lived the most skilled craftsmen in all the realms. They worked metal and magic as one, forging objects of divine power. Odin came not with threats, but with riddles, for he knew the dwarfs valued wit as much as they did gold. From them he received treasures not just of physical might, but of cunning. They forged for him the ring Draupnir, which multiplied itself every 9th night. They created wondrous things for the other gods as well. Thor's hammer Mjolnir, Freyr's golden-bristled boar Gullinbursti, and Sif's golden hair. Each item was infused with purpose and mystery, crafted in the fires of insight and sealed with ancient runes. But Odin was not the only one to walk the branches of Yggdrasil. Others, too, wandered, some by will, some by fate. The god Hermod once rode to Helheim to plead for the return of Balder, the bright god slain by treachery. Mounted on Sleipnir, Odin's 8-legged horse, he galloped for 9 days through darkness, passing silent watchers and frozen rivers, until he stood before Hel herself. There he begged for Balder's life, and Hel, in her cold wisdom, agreed, but only if all beings wept for him. Not all did. Such stories show the fragility of the divine. Even gods are bound by fate. Even they must bargain with death. Among the mortals of Midgard, legends of Yggdrasil reached down like leaves in a breeze. Shamans and seers told of the tree in whispers, sensing its life in dreams and trances. Though few ever saw it with open eyes, they felt its presence in the stillness of forests, in the echo of mountains, in the birth of stars. They carved runes on stones and wood, hoping to tap into its power. Some succeeded, most did not. And yet, even those small efforts echoed. The tree listens. It feels the touch of every spirit that calls upon it, no matter how fleeting or feeble. Like the wind through leaves, each prayer and cry ripples upward, adding to the song of the cosmos. Above it all, Odin brooded. He had seen glimpses of the future, of Ragnarok. He knew that Yggdrasil would shudder, that the eagle would cry, that Nidhogg would finally rise from the roots. He saw gods fall, fire consume the realms, and yet he also saw something else. A rebirth, a glimmer of new life among the ashes. So he prepared, not with armies or walls, but with wisdom. He scattered knowledge across the 9 realms, through stories, symbols, and secrets. He whispered to ravens, to runes, to the roots of the great tree itself, for Odin understood, when the storm comes, knowledge is the only true weapon. And in the far reaches of Yggdrasil, where branches turn into constellations and roots reach into dreams, a quiet stirring begins. Something ancient, older than gods, older than giants, watches. It remembers a time before the tree. It waits for the moment to awaken. The journey continues, through realm and riddle, through light and shadow, through the eternal breath of the world tree. In the cool twilight of Alfheim, where blossoms never fade and music lingers in the air like mist, the light elves sense the shifting currents within Yggdrasil. Though they dwell far from the rumbling roots, their souls are tethered to the tree's vitality. They dance under glowing skies, not out of ignorance of fate, but in defiance of it, embracing each moment as if it were eternal. The light elves were the first to hear the song of the tree when it trembled. It came not as thunder or roar, but as a dissonance in the harmony of existence. A low tone, deep and mournful, as though Yggdrasil itself sighed. To them, this was not a cause for fear, but a reminder. A reminder that all things, even beauty and light, must one day change. Far below them, in Niflheim's endless mists, The dead stirred in their slumber. Hell moved through her silent halls, her half-living face unreadable, her one eye ever gazing into the depths of time. She, too, felt the trees change. The frost deepened, and the rivers that once flowed in whispers now moved sluggishly, as if burdened with secrets. She did not speak of it. She did not warn the living, for Hel understood the nature of cycles, that the end is but the beginning in another shape. She kept her silence as the realm of the forgotten grew colder still. In Asgard, the signs could no longer be ignored. The gods, once jubilant in their strength, had grown more solemn. Even Thor, fierce and loud, began to pause beneath the boughs of Yggdrasil, listening. The mighty Mjolnir hung heavier at his side. He felt the world changing, though he could not say why. Frigg, wife of Odin, wept in silence. Her dreams were clouded. She saw shadows fall across her sons, across the golden halls of Gladsheim and Vingolf. The warmth of Asgard had dimmed, and though the gods still feasted, their laughter often faded into silence too quickly. Baldur's death, though long past, lingered like a wound that refused to heal. His absence was a harbinger, a light gone out too soon. It was said that nothing in the 9 realms could harm him. And yet, he fell. A single mistake, a sprig of mistletoe overlooked, became the end of the most beloved god. And from that moment onward, something changed in Yggdrasil, as if the tree mourned with them, as if the balance had been altered. Loki, the trickster, wandered far in those days, neither fully god nor fully giant, neither friend nor foe. He moved like a serpent through the branches of fate. He laughed louder than others, but his eyes were watchful. He knew more than he said. He, too, heard the whispers in the roots. He knew what the others would not admit, that the storm was coming, that Ragnarok was not a distant myth, but a shadow that lengthened with each passing season. Yet, Loki smiled, for in destruction there is creation, in endings, beginnings, and somewhere deep within him, something stirred. Something that would one day ignite a fire brighter than Muspelheim itself. But for now, the realms held. Yggdrasil still stood. The gods still ruled. The Norns still wove their threads. In Midgard, mortals lived and died by the rhythm of the seasons, unaware of the cosmic dance playing out above and below. But even in their simple lives, they played a part. A mother's lullaby, a warrior's prayer, a rune carved in hope. These small acts echoed through the tree. Yggdrasil listens. It remembers. And as we delve deeper into its story, we begin to understand that though the gods may fall and the realms may burn, the tree holds the memory of all things. And memory is a kind of immortality. In Jotunheim, the land of frost and stone, where jagged peaks claw at the sky and thunder echoes through endless valleys, the giants stirred. They too had felt the tremble in Yggdrasil, not with dread, but with grim anticipation. The Jotnar have always known that the balance could not hold forever. From the blood of Ymir they were born, and from the clash of forces they have always drawn strength. The ancient ones remembered the old prophecies, carved into ice and whispered through mountains, that spoke of fire and ash, of serpents rising, and of gods bleeding beneath a burning sky. These words were not tales of doom to them, but the return of what always was, chaos reclaiming its due. Among the Jotnar, one figure walked alone across the ice, massive, cloaked in wind and memory. Mimir, once of the gods, now disembodied and wise beyond all reckoning. Mimir's well still bubbled with the knowledge of the deep. Though his body was gone, his mind remained sharp. A mind that Odin himself once sacrificed an eye to learn from. Mimir saw further than most. He knew that fate cannot be outrun, only understood. And he, perhaps more than any other, understood Yggdrasil's groans. They were not signs of weakness, but of rebirth in the making. In Svartalfheim, the forges glowed brighter. The dwarfs worked in silence, hammers falling in rhythmic time, sparks flying into the dark like stars. They had no illusions of permanence. Metal rusts, stone crumbles, even the best blades break. So they poured their skill into artifacts that might survive the end, not to escape it, but to honor what was lost. Among them, whispers grew of reforging old relics, of weapons once thought complete, now reawakened with deeper runes. They did not fear Ragnarok. They prepared for it the way one prepares for winter, not with fear, but with precision. In Vanaheim, the fields grew wilder, vines curling toward the sky as if reaching to grasp something unseen. The Vanir gods, attuned to life's ebb and flow, noticed the change in the rhythms. Crops ripened too quickly. Storms lingered longer than they should. Animals moved differently, restless. Freyja, goddess of love and battle, walked among the meadows of her realm, her golden necklace Brisingamen, glinting with each step. She watched the skies and felt the pull of something vast and inevitable. Though fierce, she was not without sorrow. She knew love could not shield the world forever, but it could give it meaning. Freyr, her brother, watched the horizons from atop his ship Skidbladnir. He felt the change in the winds, saw the shimmer in the leaves of trees that should not have shimmered. He knew he would face Surt, the fire giant, when the end came, and still he did not raise his sword, for his destiny was to die without it. He had already gifted it away, in an act of peace. These choices, these ripples through time, and they mattered. Yggdrasil carried them all in its rings. Like a tree records its years, so too did it remember every moment of sacrifice and courage, every betrayal, every oath, every whisper. And through it all, the Norns wove. Their fingers danced along the threads of fate, tying knots that even gods could not undo. Sometimes they paused just for a heartbeat, as if wondering what it all meant, but the weaving never stopped. Back in Asgard, Odin dreamed. His ravens had brought troubling news. Stars had vanished from the sky. Wolves grew bold in the woods. And deep in the earth, the Midgard serpent had begun to stir, its coils shifting slowly beneath the sea, as if waking from a long sleep. Odin, burdened by what he knew, walked again to the Well of Erd. He stood in the shadow of Yggdrasil, placed his hand upon its bark, and closed his one remaining eye. He listened. The tree did not speak in words, but it hummed, ancient, aching, alive. And in that hum, Odin heard everything, beginnings and endings, loss and rebirth, the shape of things to come. He did not weep, he simply nodded, for he knew what must be done. The sun rose pale over Midgard, casting long shadows across forests and fields. To the mortals, it was another day, but the air carried something different. Animals moved with nervous energy. Birds fell silent before storms that had not yet arrived, and among those attuned to the earth, the wise women, the seers, the wanderers, dreams came heavy with symbols. Trees aflame, wolves with eyes like stars, a sky split open by a serpent's scream. The signs were everywhere, yet life moved on as it always had. The plow breaking soil, the child learning speech, the fire warming bones at night. Mortals, bound by time, rarely sensed the larger motions, but they still lived with courage, and courage Yggdrasil remembers. In Asgard, Odin summoned the gods to council. Valhalla's great hall echoed with the sound of armored feet and low murmurs. Thor stood ready, his grip tight on Mjolnir. Freya entered without a word, her cloak of falcon feathers trailing behind. Tyr, the one-handed, leaned on his sword, calm and resolute. Even Loki stood at the edge, cloaked in a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. The air between him and the others was tense, old wounds and deeper secrets bound in silence. Odin spoke of dreams, of omens, of the whispering leaves of Yggdrasil. He told of what he saw: fire rising, gods falling, the tree burning from root to crown. He did not speak with panic, but with the gravity of one who has seen the shape of the storm and chosen to walk into it. The gods listened. Some were afraid, others defiant, but all knew that Ragnarok was no longer distant myth. It was on the wind. Elsewhere, the giant wolf Fenrir strained at his bonds, bound by the gods long ago with the magical ribbon Gleipnir, crafted by dwarfs from the sound of a cat's footfall and the breath of a fish. He waited. His jaws, which had once bitten off Tyr's hand, gnashed in the silence. His golden eyes burned with fury and fate. He knew his role. He would break free. He would devour Odin. He would rend the sky. Not far beyond, deep beneath the sea, the Midgard serpent Jörmungandr began to stir in earnest. Its body coiled around the world. It moved with the slow certainty of prophecy. Thor was its destined opponent, and each felt the other in their blood. And in Muspelheim, the fires raged higher. Surt, ancient and terrible, lifted his flaming sword and turned his gaze toward the north. He did not smile. He did not blink. He simply waited, patient as a star's death. Yggdrasil groaned. Its leaves trembled. A single leaf, bright and gold, drifted down through the realms, falling silently from branch to root, a signal that the time of stillness was ending. Yet, not all was fear. In the hidden groves of Midgard, a child was born with a rune mark upon her brow. In Alfheim, the light elves sang louder than they had in ages. In Vanaheim, the first golden blossom of the season bloomed, even as the skies darkened. These were signs, too, that even in the face of destruction, life yearns forward, that the story does not end, even if the chapter does. Odin returned to his chamber and gazed once more upon the runes. Each one burned with the memory of what had come before. And he knew, though the gods might fall, the idea of them, the essence of them, would seed the new world. And so, he sent his ravens once more, to watch, to listen, to carry the final warnings across the 9 realms. Because the branches of Yggdrasil were now quivering. The roots drank deeply from the wells, and somewhere far beneath, Nidhogg spread his wings. Deep beneath the soil of Niflheim, where frost seeps into stone and even the air seems still with memory, Nidhogg unfurled his ancient wings. His scales glistened like rotting obsidian, his eyes 2 pits of hunger. For countless ages, he had gnawed at the root of Yggdrasil, chewing the thread of creation with slow, relentless malice. But now, the taste was changing. What once felt firm and endless now carried the tang of weakness. The root was softening. The bark, which had held strong through eons, now peeled in thin strips. Nidhogg tilted his head and listened. The tree was whispering again, but this time the song was different. It was not a lullaby of order and balance. It was a lament. Above, in the twilight of the branches, the eagle flapped its wings, ruffling the leaves that sparkled like stars. The air was tense. Vedrfall near, the hawk between the eagle's eyes, had not slept in days. Ratatoskr ran harder now, his claws scratching rougher paths up and down the bark as he delivered more frantic messages between root and crown. His chatter grew more chaotic, less playful, more urgent. In Midgard, storms began to brew with no warning. Lightning struck in patterns never before seen. Shapes like runes briefly illuminated the sky before fading. Crops failed without reason. Waters pulled away from the shores, and far, far out at sea, sailors reported glimpses of a vast shape moving beneath the waves, too large to name, too silent to fight. Children dreamed of flames and wolves, of voices calling from the woods, and those gifted with sight began to lose sleep, their minds flooded with visions they could not contain. Meanwhile, Odin summoned the last of his knowledge. He went once more to Mimir's well in Jotunheim, the well of wisdom, at the edge of the known world. He knelt before the severed head of Mimir, cradled in roots and stone. The well shimmered with a strange light. "I have seen what is to come," Odin whispered, "but I do not yet know what lies after." Mimir did not answer with words. Instead, the well bubbled, and within its surface Odin saw flashes, a tree burning. A ship of nails, sailing from the land of the dead. A child carrying a branch of ash across a silent field. And then, silence. It was enough. Odin rose, heavy with understanding. He returned to Asgard and gathered the gods one last time. Not for war, not for prophecy, but for memory. Together, they walked beneath Yggdrasil, beneath the sacred leaves where the Norns wove. And there they sang, not of glory or conquest, but of the moments that mattered. The laughter around the fire, the feeling of wind on mountaintops, the courage to face what must be faced. And Yggdrasil listened. Its bark hummed softly, as if touched by the music. The roots shifted, the branches swayed. The Norns, for the first time, looked up from their loom. They said nothing, but their eyes shimmered, as though the past, present, and future had merged in that one moment. And far, far beneath, Nidhogg stopped gnawing, just for a moment. Then the sky cracked. The crack in the sky echoed across all 9 realms. A thunderous sound, not born of storms, but of something deeper, older. It was as if the very fabric of reality had taken a breath and exhaled. In Asgard, the gods looked to the heavens and saw a line of flame tearing across the sky, stretching from the edge of Muspelheim to the peaks of the Bifrost Bridge. The Rainbow Bridge shimmered erratically, its hues twisting and fading. Heimdall, ever watchful, placed his hand on Gjallarhorn, the horn of fate, but did not yet blow. His eyes scanned the sky, and he listened to the song of the realms. Not yet, he thought, but soon. In Muspelheim, Surge stirred. His fire roared higher, his blade already glowing with the heat of worlds. He took one step forward, and the land beneath his feet cracked into molten rivers. He would not move again until the horn sounded, but he was ready. Back in Midgard, The forests grew quiet. Animals vanished into shadows. The wind shifted and carried strange scents: ash, salt, blood. Humans looked to the sky and felt something in their bones, something they could not name but could not ignore. An ache, a tension, a memory of something they had never lived through. The seers lit fires and spoke in tongues. Some wept, some laughed. One simply whispered again and again, "It's starting, it's starting, it's starting," until her voice was hoarse and the flames consumed her candles. In the deep halls of Helheim, the dead stirred. Hel stood at the gates of her silent realm and gazed upward. She could feel the great ship Naglfar, built from the fingernails and toenails of the dead, beginning to shift in its harbor. It had been long in the making. Quietly, slowly, with each forgotten body, it grew. Now the water beneath it churned. Soon it would sail. Hel raised a pale hand and touched the iron gate. She did not smile, but her lips parted as though to speak. No words came, just breath, cold and final. Yggdrasil shook again. This time, branches cracked. Leaves fell like rain across the realms. In Alfheim, the light elves stopped their songs and wept, not in despair, but in reverence. They knew this too was part of the music. The high note before the silence, the final verse before the still. In Jotunheim, the giants roared. Some called it vengeance, others justice. Still others simply welcomed the chaos, as chaos was their nature. Mountains fell as they moved. Ice shattered beneath their steps. In Vanaheim the rivers rose. Trees leaned toward the center of Yggdrasil, as if seeking shelter in their maker. Freyr stood in the heart of a golden glade and closed his eyes. He could hear the breath of the world, and he held his. And in Asgard, Heimdall lifted Gjallarhorn. Its sound tore through the sky like a scream through a dream. It was not a note, it was a truth. Ragnarok had begun. The blast of Gjallarhorn echoed across the 9 realms, like the final toll of an ancient bell. It stirred the roots of Yggdrasil, shook the stars from the sky, and summoned every being to their fate. The gods rose from their halls, not with fear, but with resolve, for they had known this day would come. It was not a surprise, it was a return. A return to the moment all stories point toward. Odin mounted Sleipnir, his 8-legged steed, and rode across the heavens with ravens circling above him. His armor gleamed like moonlight. He carried Gungnir, the spear that never missed its mark. Behind him rode the Einherjar, the chosen dead, lifted from Midgard and trained in Valhalla for this very day. They marched not with sorrow but with grim pride. Each of them had died once. Now they would fight again for the fate of all things. Thor prepared for battle, his red cape catching fire in the rising winds. Mjolnir pulsed in his hand, hungry for the blow that would one day be its last. He knew his fate. He would fight Jormungandr. He would kill the great serpent, and he would take 9 steps before falling himself, poisoned by the beast's breath. He knew, and still he smiled. Freyr stood upon the walls of Asgard, golden and serene. He held no sword. He had long ago given it away in the name of peace. Against Surtur, he would fall. But even without a blade, he would make the fire giant bleed. That, too, was foretold. Tyr, the one-handed god of war and justice, sharpened his blade. He would face Garmr, the hound of hell, in a duel to the death at the gates of the underworld. Neither would survive. He welcomed it. Loki, bound for so long, broke free from his chains. The fires of betrayal danced in his eyes, and yet, behind them, something deeper stirred. Not rage, not joy, but inevitability. He would sail with the giants aboard Naglfar. He would fight Heimdall, and they would kill each other. He did not run from it. He stepped into it like a coat he'd always worn. As the sky split open, and fire rained down from Muspelheim, Surtur stepped forth. The flames of his sword licked the clouds, and with every step he took, the world cracked further. His army followed, creatures of heat and ruin, moving like a tide of magma. Jormungandr rose from the sea, his body so vast it encircled Midgard. He stretched and coiled, and with a single hiss, the waves turned to steam. His eyes locked on the sky, waiting for Thor. Fenrir, free at last, howled. The sound shattered glass across realms. He grew larger with each breath. His mouth opened wide enough to swallow the sky, and his paws crushed mountains. He ran for Odin, and amidst it all, Yggdrasil screamed, not in words, not in sound, but in feeling, a deep, resonant cry that coursed through every branch, every root. The world tree was in pain, but it stood. For now, as the final battle unfolded, Yggdrasil trembled with every clash, every cry, every breaking wave of destiny. The 9 realms no longer remained separate. Their boundaries shattered, merging into one vast battlefield of fire, ice, and shadow. The branches of the world tree, once stretching peacefully between stars, now twisted and burned. And yet, they still held. Odin charged toward Fenrir, his spear Gungnir gleaming like the dawn that would never come again. The great wolf, eyes alight with vengeance, leapt toward him, jaws stretched wider than worlds. The All-Father met him with no hesitation. One final strike, one final defiance. But destiny held true. Fenrir clamped his jaws shut, and the sky darkened as Odin fell. The world shuddered at the death of its king. Screams echoed from Asgard to Helheim, but there was no time to mourn. Vidar, Odin's silent son, stepped forward. The quiet god, rarely seen, now fulfilled the moment of his birth. He wore a boot made of all the scraps of leather ever offered by man, crafted for this purpose alone. He placed his foot upon Fenrir's lower jaw, reached into the beast's mouth, and with divine force tore it open. The wolf thrashed, and then was still. Elsewhere, Thor met Jormungandr upon the shores of Midgard. The serpent rose higher than clouds, venom dripping from its fangs, the sea hissing in agony beneath its coils. Thor raised Mjolnir, summoned lightning, and struck. The earth split. Storms raged. The hammer found its mark again and again, until the serpent's massive head crashed into the sea, lifeless. But Thor staggered. His breath grew short. 9 steps he took, and then fell, the serpent's poison already blooming in his veins. Above, the sky tore open further as Surt advanced with fire at his heels. The stars blinked out one by one. Freyr stood in his path, unarmed but unyielding. The two forces clashed. Heat and harvest, fire and field. Freyr wounded the fire giant, but it was not enough. Surtur's sword fell, and Freyr was no more. Still, Surtur burned, and as he raised his sword to the sky, Yggdrasil shuddered again. In the shadowy gates of hell, Tyr faced Garmr, the monstrous hound. Blood ran from both before the battle even began. Old wounds and older grudges. They fought like storms colliding. Teeth and steel, claw and fury. And when the dust settled, neither moved again. In the heart of the chaos, Loki met Heimdall, the trickster, fire in his veins, and the watchman, silence in his soul. They had always stood on opposite edges of fate. Now, they danced in battle. Each blow was a memory, each strike a reckoning. And in the end, they pierced each other's hearts and fell, entwined like twin shadows. The 9 realms burned. Mountains crumbled, seas boiled, the air turned to ash, and through it all, Yggdrasil groaned, its branches blackened, its roots exposed. Leaves, once radiant with life, fell in endless spirals. The wells at its roots dried, the eagle screamed, Nidhogg laughed. And then silence. The silence that followed the final clash was heavier than thunder, deeper than the darkest well beneath Yggdrasil. No wind blew, no voice rose. The 9 realms, scorched and broken, lay in ruin. The sky itself had fractured. No stars, no sun, no moon. Only a pale, gray stillness that hovered like breath held too long. The world tree stood barely, its trunk split in places, branches twisted and blackened. The roots bled sap that shimmered like lost time. Creatures once nestled in its bark had vanished, their nests turned to ash. The eagle was gone. Vedrfolnir, the hawk, had flown beyond the veil. Even Ratatoskr, ever restless, was nowhere to be found. Yggdrasil did not fall, but it did not sing either. It had become a ghost of itself, a memory wrapped in bark and sorrow. But beneath the silence, something stirred. Not a god, not a beast, not vengeance or fury or flame, but a breath, small, pure, a breath of something not destroyed. The fires of Muspelheim had raised much, yet from ash warmth lingered. The ice of Niflheim had cracked and flooded the realms, yet from its waters stillness remained. And deep within what had been Midgard, life held on. Among the remnants of a world that had once been, 2 figures emerged, a man and a woman, not gods, not spirits. Mortals, hidden from the destruction in the hollow trunk of a tree. Some say it was a branch of Yggdrasil itself that shielded them. Lif and Lifthrasir, whose names meant life and eager for life. They stepped into the ruined world barefoot, hand in hand. The sky above them was pale, but light began to return. The earth, though scarred, breathed beneath them. Seeds, carried by wind or memory, began to sprout in the cracked soil. They did not speak. They listened. Yggdrasil, still smoking, began to hum again. Faint, fragile, but there, a new song, not of power or prophecy, but of beginning. The gods were gone, most of them. Their halls shattered, their voices now echoes in the wind, but not all was lost. Baldur returned, the shining god who had once died too soon now, walked the earth again, his light softer, more sorrowful, but kind. With him came Hod, his blind brother, once manipulated into tragedy, now free, forgiven. Together they wandered the newborn land, not as rulers, but as stewards. From the sea emerged Modi and Magni, sons of Thor, carrying Mjolnir, the hammer that had survived even the end. They did not seek vengeance, only purpose. They would protect the new world, not by force, but by strength tempered with wisdom. The world was not as it had been. It would never be. But it lived. And Yggdrasil, wounded, cracked, enduring, and began to bloom. Tiny leaves, pale green and trembling, pushed forth from blackened branches. The wells at its roots slowly filled again, not with the same waters, but with new ones. The Norns did not return, but new hands, small and curious, dipped fingers into the pools and wondered at the shapes they saw. The cycle had turned, not in a perfect circle, but in a spiral, deeper, wider. And in that spiral, hope breathed. The new dawn arrived slowly, as if the world itself was unsure how to rise again. Light crept over the edges of the ruined realms, soft and golden, not blazing like the old sun, but warm, patient. The skies, once torn by flame and poison, now held clouds that drifted quietly, unburdened by thunder. Yggdrasil, the world tree, stood at the center of this fragile rebirth. Though its bark bore the scars of Ragnarok, though its branches were fewer and its roots still ached from the bite of Nidhogg, it remained upright, and with every new leaf, it whispered of resilience. Lif and Yggdrasil, the first of the new mortals, built a shelter in the shadow of the tree. Their hands tilled the earth, planting seeds from fruits long lost. Their voices called out softly to the wind, speaking the names of the stars as they reappeared one by one. They lived without fear, for they knew they were part of a world reborn. Birds returned, not the same as before, but brighter, gentler. Animals emerged from hidden places, cautious, silent, watching. The land healed in its own time. Trees that had burned now sprouted anew, their trunks thin but determined. Rivers, once turned to steam and blood, now flowed clear again, carrying with them the memory of the old world and the promise of the new. And in the distant heavens, Balder and Hod walked together. Their footsteps left behind paths of light in the air, soft trails that glimmered like dreams. They did not speak often, but when they did, their voices carried calm. Balder's light no longer blazed with innocence. It glowed with understanding. Hod, his brother once blamed for his death, now walked in peace, guided not by vengeance, but forgiveness. Together, they rebuilt Asgard, not the golden halls of old, but a simpler place, open to the sky, where gods and mortals might one day meet again without fear. There were no thrones, no walls, only stones placed with care, and a well, not deep, but clear, fed by Yggdrasil's tears. Modi and Magni, sons of Thor, wandered the mountains and shores, speaking to the winds, searching the far reaches of Midgard for others who might have survived. Their father's hammer hung between them, not as a weapon, but as a symbol of strength passed down, of duty carried forward. They did not boast, they listened. In the quiet places of the world, stories began to form again. Around fires, Yggdrasil told their children of the old gods, of Thor's thunder, of Freyja's falcon wings, of Loki's silver tongue, not as commandments or warnings, but as lessons, as myths that carried truths not bound by time. And the children listened, wide-eyed and dreaming. Far below, beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, the wells once guarded by the Norns began to glow. Erd, Verdandi, and Skuld were gone, their fates fulfilled. But the waters remained, and with them, a new thread was beginning to be woven. No longer carved in bark, no longer etched in ancient runes, but whispered in lullabies, drawn in the dirt by tiny fingers, sung by wind through new leaves. Fate had not ended. It had changed. Yggdrasil, though quiet, now pulsed with new life. Its song was not one of endings, but of transformation. A new age had begun, not grand, not perfect, but real, rooted in memory, blossoming in possibility. And high in its branches, unseen by all, a single flower bloomed, white as snow, silent as stars. The flower atop Yggdrasil shimmered in the early light, not large, not loud, but impossibly pure. It swayed in the wind, cradled by a branch that had once cracked under the weight of the world. No creature had planted it. No god had willed it. It had simply appeared, born of the world's memory and its will to go on. Below, Lif and Lifthrasir's children grew. They ran beneath the shadow of the great tree, unaware of the suffering it had endured, yet connected to it by every breath they took. They laughed with the lightness of new beginnings, building small homes from stone and wood, crafting tools, painting stories on cave walls. Their hands were clumsy at first, but they learned, not from books, but from the earth itself. The animals, too, had changed. Deer with silver-tipped horns watched from the woods. Birds with feathers that shifted color sang new melodies. The wolves returned, quieter now, but still fierce. The line between beast and spirit had grown thin in this reborn world, as if Yggdrasil had allowed some of its old magic to soak into every living thing. In the distance where the sea met the land, Modi and Magni built a watchtower from the bones of fallen mountains, not to defend, but to observe. They stood there often, shoulder to shoulder, watching the horizon, waiting perhaps for something, for answers, for new arrivals, for silence to break into song. Balder and Hod planted groves of trees across the plains of what had once been Asgard. The new groves grew quickly, and within them, light gathered in strange patterns. Some said the groves could hear you if you spoke kindly, that they remembered voices and carried messages on the wind. Balder never confirmed this. He only smiled when asked. As time passed, the people of Midgard began to tell stories again. They gave names to the stars. They shaped myths not to explain terror, but to preserve wonder. They told of a serpent who slept beneath the sea, and a wolf who once swallowed the sky, and a tree whose roots touched every realm. They didn't speak of gods as rulers, but as memories, echoes of what had come before. The runes returned, slowly, not carved in stone, but appearing in dreams. Visions of shapes glowing in firelight or etched into the frost. Some children began to draw them without knowing why. Some sang them. Others felt them in their bones, like an ancient hum they'd always known. And as this new world grew, Yggdrasil healed. Its roots thickened once more, drinking deeply from the wells now full with new meaning. Its bark, though scarred, shimmered with veins of green light. Its leaves multiplied, soft as feathers, strong as fate, and the creatures returned. The eagle, or perhaps a new one, nested once more atop its highest branch. Vedrfolnir, or another hawk like it, settled between its eyes, and far below, in the deep shadowed root, Nidhogg was gone. Perhaps he had vanished with the old world, or perhaps he simply slept, content for now. In place of Ratatoskr came a new creature, something not squirrel, not fox, but curious and fast, streaking from branch to branch, carrying not insults, but songs. Yggdrasil did not forget, it never had, but now it remembered gently. And high above, where the flower bloomed, a drop of dew formed on one perfect petal. It fell, slow as time, down through the air, catching the sun. It touched a leaf, then another, then the trunk, then the root, and where it touched, the tree sang. The song that rose from Yggdrasil was not loud. It did not thunder across the sky or shake the realms. It was soft, subtle, the kind of melody one feels, rather than hears. Like the hum of wind through tall grass, or the rhythm of a heartbeat in a moment of quiet. It moved through the bark and into the earth, curling around the roots like a lullaby, and the world listened. In Midgard, those who lived close to the base of the world tree paused in their work. Tools were lowered, conversations faded, heads tilted slightly as if trying to place a sound just beneath the surface of silence. Children ran to the trees and pressed their hands against the trunks. Some of them closed their eyes and smiled. The song was not in words, yet every listener heard it differently. To one, it spoke of loved ones long gone. To another, it felt like the warmth of the first fire ever lit. To some, it was simply the comfort of knowing that the world was still alive and still listening. Balder, seated in the grove he and Hod had grown, opened his palms and let light rise from them, not in beams or flashes, but in small spheres, like seeds of sunlight. They floated into the trees, settled in branches, and flickered softly. He did not know what they would become, only that it felt right to give them to the forest. Modi and Magni, still watchful at the edge of the world, heard the melody in their bones. Mjolnir pulsed gently between them, not with thunder, but with memory. They looked at each other, and without speaking knew it was time to return it, not to hide it, but to let it rest. They carried it to the base of Yggdrasil and placed it among the roots. The hammer glowed faintly, then dimmed. The earth accepted it. Thunder would return someday, but not yet. In the far reaches of the new realms, the oceans began to calm. The great tides, once disturbed by the thrashing of Jormungandr, now moved in gentle rhythms. Fish swam in spirals, as if guided by unseen hands. Coral bloomed where nothing had grown for ages. Above, the stars reappeared slowly. New constellations took shape, not of gods or beasts, but of leaves, rivers, and eyes. The people named them again, and with each name came a new story, not of destruction, but of wonder. Yggdrasil's flower remained. It had become a symbol, not worshipped, but respected. Travelers came from far and wide to sit beneath the tree, to hear its hum, to breathe its scent. Some stayed for days, others for years. All left changed, and though no Norns sat at the well of Erd, the water still held visions. Those brave enough to look into its depths often wept, not from fear but from understanding. The water no longer showed fixed futures or immutable fates, but choices, branching, living possibilities. One such visitor, a girl barely of age, placed her hand into the well and saw a field of stars, a city in the sky, a forest made of song. She did not tell anyone what she saw, but when she returned home, she began to build, not for herself, but for everyone. So the world turned, slowly, surely, not toward perfection, but toward peace. Yggdrasil sang, not because all was well, but because something had endured. Through fire and shadow, through silence and storm, something had remained. A thread of life, a breath, And in that breath, everything began again. The passage of time in this new world was not counted in wars or rains, but in the rhythm of seasons, in the cycles of seed to sprout, to harvest. The people of Midgard no longer looked to gods for intervention. They looked inward and to each other. Yet even without temples or thunder, the presence of Yggdrasil remained at the heart of their world, like a pulse beneath the soil. The great tree, though no longer at the center of battle or prophecy, was now the center of reflection. Pilgrims journeyed to its roots, not with offerings, but with questions. They sat in silence beneath its leaves and listened for answers in the wind. Some claimed they heard voices, not of gods, but of dreams yet to be lived. Those who returned from the tree rarely spoke of what they felt, but they always walked a little slower, looked at others a little longer, and laughed more easily. In the growing villages near the tree's shadow, old stories began to return. Elders taught their grandchildren the names of the runes, not for magic or war, but for wisdom. The rune for strength was spoken during childbirth. The rune for journey was drawn on walking sticks. The rune for love was carved into wooden toys, passed from parent to child. Balder, now a gentle guardian rather than a shining prince, wandered among the people. He offered guidance when asked, but more often, he listened. Sometimes he sat beneath a tree for hours, speaking only to the wind. Others joined him, and together they said nothing, and somehow everything was understood. Hod, still quiet, had become a protector of the groves. He trained those who wished to guard the new world, not in swordplay, but in silence, in focus, in presence. His blindness had never been a weakness, only a different kind of seeing. Those who followed him learned to hear what others missed. The shift in a leaf, the warning in a breeze, the truth in a trembling voice. Modi and Magni remained watchers. Their tower, now overgrown with vines and flowers, had become a place of counsel, not a throne room, but a circle where all could speak. The hammer Mjolnir remained buried beneath Yggdrasil, and though storms still came, they were natural now, no longer divine punishment, just rain. And in the deep places of the earth, the wells at Yggdrasil's roots continued to ripple. Some said new spirits had begun to form near them, not gods, but something gentler. Echoes of the old world, born anew in different forms. A child who always knew the right path in the forest. A bird that sang only in dreams. A fox with eyes like starlight. The people began to call these beings whispers. They did not command worship, they asked for nothing, but they appeared when needed. Sometimes just a flash in the corner of the eye. Sometimes a warm breath on the neck when fear crept close. Yggdrasil, once the stage for gods and monsters, had become a sanctuary. It no longer groaned beneath the weight of prophecy. It exhaled, slowly, peacefully. Yet, at its highest branches, beyond where birds flew and clouds gathered, the flowers still bloomed. And far below, in the soil around its roots, something else began to stir. Not a threat, not yet, but a reminder that even in peace, the wheel turns, and that stories, even gentle ones, are never truly finished. In the hush of a spring dawn, with mist curling at the base of the mountains and dew clinging to every blade of grass, a new rhythm took hold across the realms. It wasn't the clash of gods or the call of war horns. It was the rhythm of life settling into itself. Cycles began to unfold with grace. Flowers opened before the sun with quiet reverence. Streams flowed gently around stones, carving new paths with patience rather than force. And above it all, Yggdrasil stood, not as a monument, but as a participant, no longer burdened by prophecy, no longer stalked by gnawing fangs. It had become part of the world's breath once more. Each leaf danced not with urgency, but with curiosity. Its branches reached not for the heavens, but for harmony. The children of Lif and Yggdrasil were no longer children. Their descendants walked far and wide, exploring the edges of what remained and what had become. They found places where the old world whispered through the ruins, collapsed temples, silent stones, statues half sunk in moss. These were not mourned. They were studied, respected, and left untouched. New stories formed, not to replace the old, but to accompany them. Stories of those who had walked into fire and returned as light, of those who chose silence over fury, of those who remembered and helped the world to forget its fear. The flower at the top of Yggdrasil remained unchanged. It neither wilted nor bloomed again. It simply was. Its presence was enough to remind the world that from endings, something new always waits. One night, beneath a moon that had only recently returned to the sky, a young woman stood at the base of the tree and played a flute. She didn't know why she played. She didn't remember learning the song. But her fingers moved as if guided by memory older than herself. The melody rose into the air, curling through the branches like mist, and for a moment, time paused. The stars blinked slower. The air thickened with attention. Yggdrasil responded not with sound, but with stillness. And in that stillness, something shifted. Far beneath the tree, in a cavern where roots hung like chandeliers and glowing fungi pulsed with life, a new sprout began to grow. Small, unassuming. Just a twist of green pushing up through rich soil. But the moment it pierced the ground, the cavern filled with warmth. And across the realms, those attuned to such things felt a flutter in their chest, as if something precious had just been born. The sprout grew quickly, not like weeds or vines, but like truth, steady, measured, certain. Somewhere beyond the edge of the new forest, Baldur awoke with a start. He didn't speak, but his eyes turned toward the tree. He smiled, and the smile was both joy and concern. Because even in rebirth, the possibility of imbalance always lingers. The gods were gone, yes, but the patterns they embodied still ran deep. Light and shadow, creation and destruction, growth and decay. These were not enemies. They were partners. And in forgetting one, the other often grows wild. The new sprout at Yggdrasil's root pulsed with potential. It was not good. It was not evil. It was a seed of possibility. And like all seeds, it would become what the world made of it. Above, the flower glistened with a single drop of morning dew, and for the first time in many cycles, it fell not straight downward, but followed the wind. The drop of dew floated through the air like a star falling in slow motion. It danced between the leaves of Yggdrasil, catching reflections of worlds old and new. It passed over the shoulders of wandering birds, skimmed the tops of glistening leaves, and finally descended into the lower boughs of the world tree, not with weight, but with intention. It landed not upon bark or branch, but gently on the soft curve of the new sprout, cradled deep in the heart of the roots. The moment it touched the tender green, a ripple spread through the tree, a soundless shiver, a subtle quiver in its fibers. Across Midgard, a soft wind rose and circled the hills. Leaves trembled. Dreamers stirred, and in the high branches the flower pulsed once a heartbeat, then returned to stillness. The sprout responded. It twisted slightly toward the source of light it could not yet see, its small leaves unfurled, delicate as breath. It was alive now, truly alive, aware not just of soil and water, but of purpose. Yet that purpose was unspoken, held deep within its core, like a rune not yet drawn. In the days that followed, those who wandered close to the roots of Yggdrasil reported strange feelings, a warmth near the ground, a hum beneath the soles of their feet. Some claimed to see flickers of motion in their peripheral vision, like the flutter of wings or the shift of a shadow. Others began to dream in symbols, shapes made of light and wind, too complex to understand, but too beautiful to forget. Balder came first. Drawn by something he could not explain, he left the grove where he and Hod had planted forests of peace, and made his way through the quiet woods to the base of the tree. He walked barefoot, not as a god returning to his seat, but as a man returning to memory. When he saw the sprout, he paused. It was no longer just a tender shoot. It had grown taller, not rapidly, but with intention. Its leaves were veined with silver, and its stem bore a faint glow, like moonlight filtered through water. It was familiar, not in form, but in feeling. He knelt beside it and whispered no words, only thoughts. The tree, as always, listened. Later, Hod arrived. He didn't ask why. He simply stood beside his brother and reached down to touch the soil. The vibration he felt made his breath catch. It was not power, it was potential. In the days that followed, more came. Not gods, not warriors, just people, farmers, poets, children. They gathered quietly at the base of Yggdrasil, sitting in a loose circle around the sprout. They didn't build shrines. They didn't pray. They simply stayed. Some sang. Some hummed. Some spoke stories they'd never told before. And the sprout listened. In time, it began to change again. Small tendrils extended from its base, burrowing not into the earth, but into the bark of Yggdrasil's roots. Rather than taking from the world tree, it seemed to give. The roots of the great ash tree stopped weeping sap. Leaves began to fall in gentler patterns. The tree sighed again, this time not in pain, but in relief. And from far below, in the deepest chambers of earth where the last echoes of the old world still flickered, something shifted. Not Nidhogg, not a beast or a god, but a rhythm, a balancing. The sprout was not just a new life. It was a bridge, not between realms, but between ages, between what had been and what might be. And its growth depended not on the might of gods or the will of fate, but on the choices of those who now lived under its shade. It did not demand belief. It did not ask for offerings. It simply waited. And high above, in the quiet sky, a second flower began to bloom. The second flower opened in silence, high within Yggdrasil's uppermost canopy, where no wind reached and only the gentlest starlight lingered. It unfolded slowly, as though waking from a dream. Its petals were deep violet, streaked with threads of gold, and at its center sat a drop of light, not water, not dew, but something older, something watching. Unlike the first flower, which bloomed with renewal and innocence, this second blossom held weight. It wasn't heavy with sorrow, but with memory, the kind of memory that doesn't speak. It waits, it observes, it remembers everything and forgets nothing. As the flower bloomed above, The sprout below responded. Its leaves quivered, and for the first time, it released a single sound, not a voice, not a cry, but a note. It rang through the roots and into the soil, a pure tone that sent ripples through the branches of Yggdrasil. The great tree trembled, not in fear, but in recognition. Those near the tree felt the sound before they heard it. Hearts skipped, dreams broke, eyes welled with tears for reasons no one could explain. For some, it reminded them of a mother's touch long lost. For others, it was the last smile of a friend, the one they carried in silence. The sprout's song was not loud. It simply uncovered things forgotten. Across Midgard, a soft wind blew that evening. It passed through fields, forests, and river valleys, carrying the tone like pollen. Animals raised their heads. Birds tilted their wings mid-flight. Children stopped playing and stared into the sky. Even far-off travelers, unaware of Yggdrasil, paused as if remembering a name they never knew they'd forgotten. Balder, standing once more near the base of the tree, breathed in deeply. "It remembers," he said. "What does?" Hod asked beside him. Balder looked at the sprout. "Everything." The people continued to gather. Some came from distant coasts, others from across great plains. There were no roads leading to the tree, yet they found their way without maps. They didn't speak of pilgrimage or prophecy. They only said, "I had to come." And the sprout continued to grow, slowly, deliberately, with every hand that reached out in kindness, with every word spoken in truth, with every tear shed in healing. It grew stronger, taller, deeper. Its tendrils now embraced the bark of Yggdrasil, like a child holding the hand of a parent. The bark that had once cracked and bled during Ragnarok began to smooth. The blackened places softened. Pale green moss crept along the old wounds, not to cover them, but to comfort them. And in Alfheim, where light had once reigned supreme, the elves' long silence stirred. Their presence had faded after the collapse of the old realms, not dead, but withdrawn. But now, they felt the resonance of the second flower. It vibrated along lines of energy too subtle for most to notice. To them, it was like a bell calling them home. In the quiet places, they gathered, pale as moonlight, tall as willows, with eyes like the first reflections of water. They said no words, for none were needed. They turned toward Yggdrasil. The realms were stirring, not awakening, but shifting. No gods thundered through the skies. No giants marched across frozen plains. Yet something deeper than either was moving. A conversation between memory and possibility. The second flower turned ever so slightly, its light intensifying, and in its glow, hidden seeds began to open. They weren't on the tree. They were everywhere, buried in pockets of the world where love had once been strong, where courage had bloomed quietly in forgotten times, where someone had whispered a wish to the wind and meant it. These seeds had waded through fire and flood, through silence and collapse, and now, at last, they began to grow. The seeds that stirred across the realms were not planted by hand, nor watered by rain. They had slept within the fabric of the world, tucked beneath stones, deep in the hollows of trees, buried in snowdrifts and riverbeds. Each one carried a fragment of what had been lost, not in body, but in meaning. Hope left unspoken, promises kept quietly, love that never asked to be remembered, yet never faded. As the second flower of Yggdrasil pulsed in the high canopy, these dormant pieces of life awakened. In a remote grove near where Helheim once flourished, green vines uncurled from beneath the moss. Their leaves shimmered with iridescence, and as they grew, they released a perfume that carried the scent of laughter, a feeling, a memory, a spark of joy. On the broken cliffs of the old Jotunheim, where the frost had long held dominion, small shoots of firegrass emerged. Their roots pushed through frozen soil, melting paths that wound between shattered boulders and crumbled towers, and where two of these vines touched, a light flared not of heat, but of warmth. Even the giant's bones seemed to stir. In the deep caverns where the dwarfs of Svartalfheim once forged wonders, glimmers of strange fungi now pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. No tools were swung, no hammers rang, but from the glowing moss grew crystals that hummed with resonance, a soft, melodic echo, as if remembering the songs sung during the making of God's weapons. And in Midgard, along the winding rivers and quiet fields, mortals noticed that trees now leaned toward each other when the wind blew, as if whispering. Children swore that when they drew runes in the dirt, they glowed faintly, briefly, just enough to make them laugh in wonder. Elders who had once seen war and loss now walked without canes, not because pain was gone, but because the world beneath them seemed lighter. Yggdrasil, for all its vastness, felt every stirring. It drank in these moments like water. They were not grand, they were not dramatic, but they were real, and the tree grew stronger. The sprout at its base, no longer merely a sprout, had formed a small trunk now, thin and elegant. Its bark was soft like velvet, but pulsed with threads of gold beneath. Tiny buds appeared on its upper branches, glowing gently. It was not trying to be Yggdrasil. It was something else entirely. Not a replacement, a companion. Some began to call it Yggdrasil, the tree of memory. It was said that Yggdrasil didn't just remember the past, it healed it. When people sat beneath it and spoke their sorrow, their pain did not vanish, but it settled. It sank into the roots and was transformed into something softer. The tree did not judge. It simply listened, and in that listening gave comfort. Balder often sat near Yggdrasil in silence. Hod walked its perimeter at night, never guarding it, but honoring it. And as for the people, they began leaving simple offerings, not out of fear, but gratitude. A stone with a child's rune, a flower tied with a bit of string, a carved wooden figure of someone missed. The second flower, still high above, opened wider. From its core, something tiny drifted downward, a fleck of gold, no larger than a grain of sand. It floated for days, drifting across the sky, before landing in the palm of a sleeping child beneath Yggdrasil's shade. She awoke, blinked once, and clutched the fleck without question. That night, she told her mother a story. No one had taught her a tale of how the stars were first lit, and how they whispered to each other across the sky. Her mother wept quietly. It was the same story her grandmother once told her, and she had never spoken it aloud. Yggdrasil did not speak, but it remembered. And as more seeds stirred, as more light bloomed from dark corners, the world began to hum again. Not the song of power, the song of presence, the song of becoming. The song of becoming spread slowly across the 9 realms, not like fire, but like a soft rain, soaking into the places where silence had taken root. It didn't arrive with drums or declarations, but with breath, with stillness, with a knowing that life had not only returned, but was now something different than it had ever been before. Yggdrasil, the new tree of memory, stood now at half the height of its parent. Yggdrasil, though slender, its branches had begun to stretch in sweeping curves, each one tipped with buds that never quite bloomed, as if waiting for something or someone. Where its leaves touched the light, they shimmered with faint colors that no language could name. Children played in its shade daily, inventing games they swore the tree suggested to them in dreams. They left pebbles and songs and laughter at its roots. And sometimes, if one stood quietly at sunset, you could hear what sounded like the voices of those long gone, not as ghosts, but as memories made gentle, memories that smiled. Yggdrasil, for its part, no longer bore the burden of connecting realms in conflict. Its role had shifted. It was no longer the battleground of prophecy. It had become the silent sky, the soil of myth, the breath beneath all things. Its uppermost branches reached into stars again, and high among them, more flowers like the first two had begun to bud. One glowed blue like twilight. Another pulsed faintly with red slow like a heartbeat. A third swirled with colors that changed depending on who looked at it, as though it reflected the soul of each observer. Each flower, it was said, contained a story. Not the story of the gods or the end of the world, those tales had already been told. These were quieter stories, of a mother's final song, of a promise carved into a ship's hull, of a tear shed for someone never met. And these stories drifted downward as motes of light, not falling, but choosing where to land. In fields, in caves, on mountaintops, within rivers. And wherever they landed, something new began to grow. These places became known as quiet hearts, sacred spaces where the energy of the new world pooled. No temples were built, no monuments raised, but people came. Alone, in pairs, or silently in groups. They sat, they breathed, and sometimes they saw something they didn't understand. A shimmer, a flicker, a shadow with the face of someone loved. No one feared these moments. They simply listened. The elves of Alfheim returned slowly. They arrived in the forests without announcement, stepping between trees as if they had never left. Their eyes were calm, their presence light. They came not as lords or saviors, but as keepers of songs long left unsung. In silence, they offered guidance not in words, but in gesture. A nod, a hand extended, a look held for a heartbeat too long. In Midgard, the people began to mark time differently, no longer in seasons alone, but in dreams remembered, in stories past. They celebrated the day of first light, the morning when the first flower bloomed high in Yggdrasil. They celebrated the day of breath, when Yggdrasil first made its sound. And they celebrated the day of stillness when no wind blew, and the tree stood utterly silent, listening to the entire world all at once. And then, one night, something new happened. A star fell from the sky. It was not fire. It was not stone. It was a being. It landed not with impact, but with a sigh, in a field of quiet hearts. Those who arrived found a figure curled in the grass. Not a god, not a ghost, not a monster, a child. Pale, radiant, with eyes like the spaces between stars. She said her name was Erwin. She didn't know where she came from, only that she had been called. She didn't speak often, but when she did, the air around her held still, not in fear, but in reverence. She asked only one question: where do the dreams go when no one remembers them? No one could answer, but Yggdrasil bloomed a single blossom that evening. It was shaped like a spiral, soft, violet blue, and it turned toward the stars. The spiral-shaped blossom of Yggdrasil opened slowly through the night, glowing faintly with the same light that drifted in the eyes of the child, Erwin. It pulsed in soft waves, its color deepening with each heartbeat, as if syncing with something far beyond sight. The people who had gathered near the base of the tree didn't speak. They simply stood still and watched. Erwin sat beneath the blossom, legs crossed, hands folded in her lap. She tilted her head upward, gazing not at the flower, but past it, into the vastness of sky. She blinked slowly and whispered to no one in particular, "They're returning." When asked what she meant, she said nothing more. But those who looked into her eyes saw something. Not reflections, not symbols, but places, faces, whole lives passing through her gaze like clouds across the moon. It was as if the stories that had been lost in the fires of Ragnarok were slowly weaving themselves back through her, not as tales of war, but as dreams yearning to be reborn. That night, many dreamed of things they had never known. Great halls beneath starlit oceans, ships made of silk that sailed through windless skies, cities carved into the underside of floating cliffs. They woke weeping or laughing, or simply staring into the quiet with a feeling of fullness they could not name. Yggdrasil, now clearly more than just a tree, had begun to hum again. The note was not the same as before. This one was layered, braided, woven with threads of sound that rose and fell like a lullaby sung by many voices. And for the first time, it did not hum alone. Yggdrasil joined in low and slow, a bass beneath the melody. 2 trees, 2 voices, 1 memory. The petals of the spiral blossom turned slowly on their stem, as though watching the stars wheel above. When the light of dawn touched its edge, a single seed detached and floated down, not to the ground, but into Erwin's hands. She looked at it for a long while. It was the size of a pearl, but weightless. She held it to her ear and closed her eyes. "What do you hear?" a child asked her. She smiled faintly. "Something old and something new." Then, carefully, she buried the seed beneath a nearby stone, not at the roots of the tree, but a short walk away, near a stream that whispered over smooth stones. "Why not plant it here?" the child asked again, pointing to the shade of Yggdrasil. Erwin didn't answer. Instead, she placed her palm on the stone and whispered, "Not all light grows best in light." And from that moment, the stone began to glow faintly. Moss crept over it in spirals, and the sound of the stream shifted, playing a tune none could quite hum, but all remembered as if it were once sung to them in childhood. The place became known as the Listening Stone. Over time, more stones like it appeared, in forests, in valleys, even in the quiet corners of old ruins. People would find them when they needed them most, often alone, often in silence. And when they laid their hand upon the stone, they felt not answers, but belonging. Erwin continued to walk the lands, not as a prophet or a leader, just a presence. She would sit beside those grieving and say nothing. She would hold the hand of a dying elder and watch the stars. She would listen to children invent impossible stories, and then quietly make them real in small, beautiful ways. Some began to call her the Dream Keeper. Others said she was not born, but remembered into being. Still others believed she was a seed of the old gods, a remnant of Baldur's light, or the echo of a tear once wept by Frigg. But Erwin denied none of it, nor did she confirm it. She simply walked, and every place she went, something grew. Yggdrasil felt her footsteps. Yggdrasil heard her song. And far above, a 4th flower bloomed, darker than the others, yet not ominous, deep navy blue with veins of silver. It swayed gently, not in the wind, but as if moved by time itself. The fourth flower in Yggdrasil's canopy opened without fanfare. No sound announced it. No light flared. It simply unfolded, petal by petal, revealing a center that shimmered like moonlight on still water. Those who looked upon it, even from far below, reported a strange feeling of déjà vu, as though something once lost had quietly returned, not to their memory, but to their very bones. It was the color of deep night, not darkness, but the blue of mystery, the hue just before the stars awaken. This flower did not release seeds or song. Instead, it opened a pause in the world, a stillness, a breath that stretched across the 9 realms. The birds grew quiet, the wind slowed. In that brief moment, everyone, beast, spirit, mortal, felt something shift inside them, a momentary suspension of time's weight. The elders in Midgard sat quietly on their porches. The elves of Alfheim lit no lanterns that night. Even the wolves of the far forests paused mid-hunt and simply watched the sky. Yggdrasil's leaves curled slightly inward as if bowing in recognition. Its spiral blossom closed again, entering a second stage of growth, no longer a bloom, but a cocoon of layered petals, pulsing gently with golden light. Something inside it was changing. And it wasn't alone. Across the realms, people began dreaming of doors. Some saw doors carved into mountains. Others saw doorways made of vines, suspended in air. One child dreamed of a door inside a stone, which opened into a field of floating candles. A blind man dreamed of a door made of pure sound. A woman on her deathbed whispered that she had stepped through a door made of feathers and fire. And on the other side, she had heard her name spoken by a voice she hadn't heard since childhood. No 2 dreams were the same, and yet, all of them left behind the same feeling, a beckoning. Irwin, ever silent in her knowing, spoke of these doors only once. She said, "They do not lead away, they lead through." When asked what was on the other side, she smiled and said, "That depends on how you walk." These doors weren't physical. They weren't meant to be found with the eyes. They were awakenings, realizations, choices that marked turning points, not with fanfare, but with stillness. Each door was a point in time when a soul shifted slightly toward what it was always meant to become. Yggdrasil began to grow differently now. One of its upper branches bent toward the east, forming a natural arch. Beneath this arch, the grass turned silver in moonlight and gold in sunlight. People came and stood there, and though they could not explain why, they felt as if something within them realigned, as if a question they didn't know they had just been gently answered. They began calling it the branch of becoming, and beneath that branch, Erwin placed a single stone. Upon it, she carved a rune no one recognized. Not even Balder, who knew every rune of the old world. Not even the dwarfs, who came quietly from their stone-hidden halls to study it. The rune shimmered, shifted, refused to be captured in words. The elves bowed when they saw it. The humans stood in awe. Some wept without knowing why. It became known as the unspoken rune. And still, Yggdrasil and Yggdrasil sang together a duet of presence and memory, of breath and root. Their tones layered through the winds, riding on the backs of birds, rippling through water, carried in the hush of the world's slow turning. And high in the sky, the fourth flower slowly released a droplet not of dew, but of shadow and light interwoven. It drifted downward, slower than time, taking the shape of a feather. Where it would land, no one knew. But Erwin turned her eyes toward it and smiled. The feather from the fourth flower drifted for days. No wind touched it. No bird dared cross its path. It glowed faintly in the evening sky and shimmered at dawn. Those who saw it said it moved like a thought, slow, deliberate, as if waiting for the right moment to be remembered. It passed over oceans that whispered with the memories of drowned cities, over forests that grew from the ruins of fallen thrones, and finally came to rest not in a sacred grove or high mountain, but in the hands of a wandering boy sitting alone beside a fire in the middle of nowhere. He did not know who he was. He had no family name, no tribe, no map. He walked because something in him refused to stay still. And when the feather landed in his palm, he looked at it not with awe, but with recognition. "I've been waiting for you," he said, though he didn't know why. The feather dissolved the moment he spoke. It didn't vanish. It became part of him, a lightness in his chest, a memory that wasn't his, and yet now was. He stood and began to walk, not aimlessly, not lost, but toward something. Across the realms, something shifted. Yggdrasil's cocoon blossom began to crack open, not violently, but like a petal unfolding in reverse. From within it emerged a glowing core, not a fruit, not a flower, not a seed. A shape undefined by language. Those who approached it could not describe what they saw. Some said it looked like music frozen in light. Others claimed it was a doorway without a frame. A few wept, claiming it looked like someone they had loved once, long ago. But no two saw the same thing. Erwin approached it and placed her hand upon it. Her expression did not change. She whispered, "It is ready." No one knew what she meant. The boy with the feather, now deep into the heartlands of Midgard, had begun to find things. Not objects, but places. Forgotten wells. Stones with markings too old for memory. Trees with roots that hummed when he drew near. He listened. He sat. He asked no questions. He simply let each place leave its imprint on him. And something within him began to awaken. At night, he dreamed of the 9 realms, not as they were, but as they could be. Not burning, not broken, but humming together like chords in harmony. In his dreams, Yggdrasil stretched across a sky filled with stars that sang. Beneath its branches were faces. Some he knew, some he would know, some he would never meet. He dreamed of doors too, always doors, and now always opening. Back at Yggdrasil, the unspoken rune began to glow brighter, and in its glow, those who sat nearby saw visions of themselves, not as they were, but as they were becoming. Some cried. Others simply smiled, none left unchanged. Balder, watching all this from a distance, turned to Hod and said, "Something old is finishing, and something older is beginning," Hod replied. The 4th flower, high in Yggdrasil, withered then. Its time had passed. Its gift had been given. But just as it curled back into the branch, 3 more buds appeared beside it. The tree was not done blooming. Yggdrasil had spent its first life holding the realms together, then surviving the end of all things. But now it was something else. A memory tree, a breath tree, a becoming tree. And Yggdrasil, it was the echo of its future, and the seed of what came next. The boy arrived at the foot of Yggdrasil the next morning. Erwin was waiting for him. They did not speak. They simply stood side by side and listened. The morning was quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The boy and Erwin stood beneath the arch of Yggdrasil's branch of becoming, the soft golden grass brushing their ankles. Above them, the glowing core, that strange, luminous shape, born from the spiral blossom, hovered gently, its form shifting with each blink, never quite still. It pulsed in tune with the breath of the tree, and with the hearts of the two who now stood before it. They said nothing. They didn't need to. Between them passed a silence deeper than language, a recognition that went beyond memory or identity. It was as if they had met 1,000 times before, in dreams, in stories, in the pause between moments. Erwin raised her hand, not to touch the core, but to invite it. The boy stepped forward. As he did, Yggdrasil's leaves rustled, not from wind, but from intention. A hush swept through the grove. Even the birds quieted. All eyes, mortal, elf, whisper being turned toward the center. The boy reached out and placed both hands on the core. There was no flash, no thunder, just a deep, resonant tone that passed through the ground and sky, through bark and stone, through heartbeat and breath. It wasn't loud. It wasn't frightening. It was the sound of everything aligning. The boy closed his eyes, and the vision came. He saw the 9 realms as threads of light, some tangled, some frayed, some woven into perfect spirals. He saw their births, their deaths, their rebirths. He saw Yggdrasil being born from the breath of the void and dying in fire and ash. He saw Yggdrasil sprouting from its sorrow. He saw gods rise and fall, not in glory or punishment, but in rhythm like waves on an endless sea. He saw himself, not as a boy, but as a flame flickering between stories. Not a chosen one, not a hero, just a thread, a necessary note in the song. And he understood. He let go of the core. When he opened his eyes, the world had not changed. But he had. A smile touched Erwin's lips. She walked to the stone bearing the unspoken rune, and gently tapped it once. The rune shimmered, then split into 3. Each fragment rose into the air and drifted toward a different direction of the world, carried by light, by memory, by time. One east, one west, one into the sky. The meaning was clear, though no words were shared. The world is ready to remember itself. From that day, the boy began to walk again. But this time, he was not alone. Wherever he went, the land began to hum. The rivers flowed more clearly. The trees leaned in slightly. He never claimed to lead, but people followed. Not as disciples, but as fellow walkers. Each had a different dream. Each had touched a different stone. Each had opened a different door. Erwin remained beneath Yggdrasil. She became its keeper, its breath. Some say she never slept again, for she had become part of the tree's dreaming. Others said she sang to the stars every night, teaching them new constellations. Whatever the truth, her presence steadied the world like gravity, invisible, constant, gently pulling all things toward balance. And high in Yggdrasil's canopy, the 3 new flowers began to bloom in unison. One burned with silver flame. One shimmered like glass filled with wind. One was entirely dark and entirely still. Not all flowers bloom with light. Not all light is gentle, but all are needed. The next cycle was stirring, and the trees were listening. The 3 new flowers atop Yggdrasil unfurled together, their timing precise and deliberate, as if choreographed by something ancient and unseen. Their colors and forms were unlike anything known, not of nature, not of gods, not of dreams, but something in between. Each emitted a resonance that spread outward like waves on the surface of still water, touching every realm in turn. The silver flame flower flickered without heat, casting reflections of what might be. Those who looked upon it found themselves thinking of futures they had never considered, lives they had never lived, words they had never spoken, choices left behind. It illuminated not just possibility, but potential, the kind that waits quietly for courage. The glass and windflower was transparent but never truly seen. It shimmered when not looked at, blurred when studied too closely. Its song was soft, barely audible, and always changing. Those who heard it reported feeling weightless, as if their burdens had been lifted or had never existed. It didn't show them visions, it let them rest. And the still, dark flower, it did nothing. At least, nothing visible. It sat perfectly still in the canopy, absorbing no light, casting no shadow. It was the pause between breath and speech, the moment before sleep, the silence in music. Those who felt its presence described it not with fear, but with awe. It wasn't emptiness, it was completion. Below, the realms continued to change. The boy's journey led him to the very edge of Midgard, to cliffs where the wind spoke in riddles, and the stones were carved with runes so old they had no names. He sat among them for 3 days without food, listening. When he rose, he carved a single new rune into the rock, not from memory, but from knowing. It glowed faintly, and as it did, birds returned to the sky over the cliffs for the first time in a generation. He moved on. In the forests of Helheim, the elves began to plant trees in spirals, not for structure, but for sound. When the wind passed through them, it carried messages not of prophecy, but of presence, small stories, moments of wonder, reminders to breathe. In the sea, far from any shore, the waves began to form repeating patterns, circles within circles, as if the ocean itself were learning to speak. Some said they heard laughter in the foam. Others said they saw faces in the currents, not threatening, but familiar, as though the water remembered their names. Yggdrasil, meanwhile, began to glow from within. Its trunk now glimmered with threads of light, like veins of memory winding through time. Its upper branches curved upward, reaching not to the sky, but toward Yggdrasil. And for the first time, the two trees touched. Just a single branch. The moment they connected, a quiet pulse moved through the world. Not a shockwave, not an explosion, just a gentle vibration that made birds still, made wind pause, made stones hum. It was the sound of something old, healing. And in that healing, doors began to open again, not in dreams, but in waking life. People across the realms began to find passages, not magical, not glowing, just slightly out of place. A gap between two trees that hadn't been there yesterday. A stair carved into a hill where none had climbed before. A hollow in the wall of a cave that opened into light. Those who entered were never lost. They came back changed. Some with a new word carved on their skin. Some with a song they couldn't stop humming. Some with silence in their eyes, not because they had no words, but because they had found peace too big to speak. Erwin stood beneath the branch of becoming and watched the skies. And one day, without a sound, she vanished. Yggdrasil's glow deepened, not in mourning, but in gratitude. She had not left. She had simply become. When Erwin vanished, No one saw her go. One moment she stood beneath the glowing canopy of Yggdrasil. The next, only the soft imprint of her steps remained in the grass. No wind swept her away. No light consumed her. She simply passed, like breath, from presence into essence. The people did not grieve. They felt her everywhere. In dreams, her voice hummed. In rivers, her presence lingered. In the hush of twilight, her memory curled around the silence like a comforting shawl. She had not disappeared. She had dissolved into the song. Yggdrasil responded immediately. Its trunk deepened in color, darkened like rich earth after rainfall. The unspoken rune carved at its root pulsed gently, then faded, not lost, but fulfilled. In its place, the grass grew in a perfect spiral, soft and luminous. It was said that if you stood in its center and closed your eyes, the world would breathe with you. Yggdrasil's 3 new flowers, silver flame, glass wind, and still darkness, had begun to shift. They turned not toward the realms, but toward each other. Their stems twisted together, forming a braided strand of light, air, and void. As they touched, the sky dimmed, but not ominously. It was the soft dimming of a room before a story is told. The braided bloom pulsed once, and across the 9 realms, the sky changed. New constellations appeared, stars arranged in patterns unfamiliar to any known lore. But when the people looked up, they knew their names without being told. They called them the 3 rememberings. One for what had been, one for what was, and one for what might yet be. These stars never faded, even when the sun rose. They lingered in the corners of the sky like promises. Children would trace them in the air with their fingers. Elders would whisper their names before sleep. Travelers used them to find their way through fog and forest, not because they moved, but because they reminded the heart where to go. The boy, now grown into something not quite man, not quite legend, stood at the shore of a lake that reflected not sky, but memory. Every ripple showed a different moment, not his, not anyone's, but all moments. He did not reach in, he simply watched. Then, turning, he carved his final rune into the soil beside the lake. It read, simply, now. He returned to Yggdrasil once more. No fanfare marked his arrival, no celebration awaited. He walked beneath the branch of becoming, placed his hand on the tree, and smiled. Then he sat, and became still. Those who came after said he never moved again, not out of death, but out of arrival. He had reached where he was always going, and from that place of stillness, Yggdrasil began to bloom again. This time, not from above, but from within. Its bark cracked softly, and a single stream of golden light began to spiral upward through its core. The light rose into the branch that touched Yggdrasil, and Yggdrasil answered. The great world tree, for the first time in countless ages, shifted. It bent toward Yggdrasil, and where the two met, where old touched new, where memory touched possibility, a single seed formed. It hovered in the space between both trees, spinning gently, not falling, not rising, just waiting. And across all the realms, the people waited too. Not with fear, not with longing, but with readiness, because some seeds grow not from soil, but from story. The seeds suspended between Yggdrasil and Yggdrasil glowed softly, not with brightness, but with warmth. It turned slowly in place, held aloft not by wind or magic, but by something deeper, by intention. Its surface shimmered like a drop of water lit from within, and though small, it seemed to contain the weight of everything that had come before. The people called it many things. Some named it Sadr, the breath seed. Others called it Kvither, the womb of worlds. A few whispered no name at all, believing that whatever name was given would shape what it became. And perhaps they were right. Every realm felt its presence. In Alfheim, the light shifted color, bending toward a new spectrum that only the elves could fully perceive. They gathered beneath moon-drenched trees and sang songs older than language. Songs they had forgotten, but which now returned unbidden. Their voices rose like mist and drifted toward the trees, toward the seed, as if adding threads to its spiral. In Vanaheim, rivers began to wind in new directions, curling into graceful shapes that mirrored the stars. The Vanir, long silent, returned in subtle ways, their laughter carried on breezes, their footprints found in morning dew. They spoke through nature now, letting petals bloom in response to questions, letting the rain answer long-held grief. In the mountains once known as Jotunheim, the giants' echoes awoke, not to roar or threaten, but to remember. Massive stone shapes long thought to be dead began to stir. Not bodies, but bones of the world. They cracked open like seeds, revealing glows deep within like embers still hot after all this time. The spirits of the giants rose like steam and circled the skies, whispering not war, but balance. Even Helheim stirred, not in rebellion, not in hunger, but in silence that finally released its breath. Those who had lingered too long in stillness began to walk again, not back into the living world, but forward into something else, something kinder. The nine realms were not returning to what they had been. They were becoming something new, and in the center of it all, the seed turned. It turned with rhythm, with patience, with knowing. Baldur stood beneath it, now older, now quiet. He had not spoken in many days, not since the seed had first formed. He watched it with the reverence one might show the first fire or the last sunset. Hod remained nearby, his presence like a shadow, not dark, but grounding. They both knew the seed was not theirs. It did not belong to the gods, nor to mortals, nor to memory. It belonged to becoming. And then, one morning, it began to descend. Not fall, descend. With grace, with purpose. It drifted downward through the golden spiral of Yggdrasil's inner light, through the hush of leaves and breath and silence, and came to rest in the very heart of the spiral grove. The moment it touched earth, the world paused, truly paused. Not a bird flew, not a river flowed, not a star moved. For one perfect heartbeat, all of existence held still. And then, the ground did not shake. The skies did not open. The seed simply split. A single shoot rose from it, curling upward like a question, thin, trembling, luminous. From it came a sound, not a song, not a word, but a beginning. And all across the nine realms, those who heard it smiled. The sound that rose from the newborn shoot was not one of grandeur or triumph. It was soft, like a sigh escaping from a long-held breath. Yet its effect was felt everywhere. It moved through the branches of Yggdrasil and Yggdrasil, like wind through strings, resonating, singing, remembering. It was the sound of new roots pushing into ancient soil. It was the song of something never before seen, yet deeply known. People across Midgard paused as the note passed over them. Infants stirred in their sleep. Old warriors who had forgotten how to dream suddenly opened their eyes. Trees turned their leaves toward the horizon, and the oceans grew still for a single breath before returning to their tides. The shoot did not grow quickly. It didn't need to. Growth, now, was not measured in speed, but in depth. Its stem thickened gently. A second sprout emerged beside it, not in symmetry, but in harmony. Together they rose, not in competition, but in conversation. Leaves unfurled like pages in a book the world had forgotten it had written. The people began to gather once more, not out of fear or curiosity, but with reverence. They brought no offerings. They asked for nothing. They came to witness. Yggdrasil had been the tree of memory. Now, with the seedling growing beneath it, another truth became clear. This new tree, this quiet, radiant sapling, was not memory. It was intention, not a reflection of what had been, but a question of what could be. The people began calling it Yggdrasil, the tree of willingness, where Yggdrasil had held the realms, where Yggdrasil had remembered them. Yggdrasil would invite them to become something more, not with rules, not with prophecy, but with choice. Erwin's voice was heard again, not from the tree, not from the wind, but from within. Within stories told by fires, within lullabies sung in places far from the roots of the trees. People spoke her words without knowing where they came from. Become gently, grow bravely. The three trees now formed a triangle across the realms. They did not dominate, they balanced. Their roots intertwined beneath mountains, rivers, and stars. Their leaves exchanged light in a language older than sound. And at the center of it all, where the roots of all three met, a well-formed knot of water, of light, clear, slow-moving, and deep. Those who peered into it did not see their faces. They saw paths, not destinies. Paths, options, doorways, journeys waiting to be chosen. It became known as the Well of Word Unbound. Unlike the Well of Erd, it did not fix fate. It freed it. It didn't show what must be. It showed what might be, if one was brave enough to walk toward it. From that day forward, the people changed. Not instantly, not without struggle, but with honesty. They began to ask different questions. Instead of, "What is my fate?" they asked, "What is my gift?" Instead of fearing death, they honored stillness. Instead of worshiping gods, they began honoring each other, the sacred spark in each eye, each word, each silence. And in that change, the realms themselves softened. Storms passed more gently. Night carried less fear. Even time seemed less hurried. Yggdrasil's leaves shimmered not with power, but with possibility. It was said that if you stood beneath its boughs with a question in your heart and truly listened, it would not answer you, but it would help you answer yourself. Under the canopy of Yggdrasil, time became something new. Not a river rushing forward, not a circle repeating itself, but a garden, a place to wander, to pause, to choose one's direction, not based on fear or prophecy, but on what was most true in that quiet moment of becoming. No laws were written in its name. No temples were built in its honor, but stories gathered like moss at its roots. People came from every corner of the 9 realms, not seeking salvation, but reflection. They arrived alone, or in small groups. Some brought no words. Others brought songs that had never been heard before. sung in strange, beautiful tones. A few came simply to sit in its silence. Yggdrasil never spoke. It didn't need to. Its very presence was a question and a permission. The boy, now a man of many names and none at all, remained close, though never in the same place for long. He wandered between Yggdrasil, Mingrasil, and Yggdrasil as one might walk between dreams. When asked who he was, he would often smile and say, "A step along the way." It was said that sometimes, when the wind was right, all three trees would shift their leaves in unison. The sound was like distant bells, or memory finding a new home. The well of word unbound at the tree's center had become a place of gathering, but never of crowding. People approached it with care. They dipped their fingers in its light and saw not visions, but invitations. A woman once touched the well and stood perfectly still for 3 days. When she moved again, she walked into the forest and began building something not for herself, but for children yet unborn. A man came to the well with hatred in his heart, and when he touched the surface, he wept for hours, then left, leaving his weapon behind forever. The well did not change them. It reminded them Yggdrasil, ancient and mighty, began to bud again. Its upper branches, once seared by fire and bent by fate, now bore blossoms the color of dawn. The braided flowers that had once twined silver, wind, dark, had given rise to new constellations. Now those stars began to move across the sky in patterns. Maps, to nowhere, and yet always pointing home. Mingrasil remained the keeper of stories. Its leaves began to fall once a year, each etched with a single word. No one knew how to read them, not aloud. But when held against the skin, the word became a feeling, and the feeling became a story only that person could understand. Yggdrasil, youngest of the three, began to root deeper. Its roots were different. They didn't burrow down. They reached sideways, touching old places long forgotten, waking ruins that hummed with ancient music, causing old stones to glow softly again, not as warnings, but as invitations. It reached toward the lonely, toward the waiting, toward the unfinished. And everywhere it touched, people began to remember who they were before the world told them who to be. In Svartalfheim, the deep dwarven halls began to echo once more with song, not of forging weapons, but of forging meaning. In Helheim, the silence became something warmer, not emptiness rest. In Muspelheim and Niflheim, realms of fire and ice, something incredible happened. The flames of Surt and the mists of the void touched again. But this time, no giant rose, no monster was born. This time, a tree sprouted. Not like the others, smaller, wilder. It grew quickly and glowed faintly blue at night, red at dawn. No one could find it twice it moved when unobserved. Those who did see it said it whispered things that felt like secrets you never knew you were keeping. It was called Yggdrasil, the tree of shadows and sparks. Not a fourth in the triad. A mirror. A reminder that not all growth is soft, but all growth is sacred. And across the realms, the story continued. Not because someone wrote it, but because everyone lived it. Yggdrasil, the tree of shadows and sparks, grew quietly at the edge of knowing. Unlike the other trees, visible, rooted, constant, it appeared only when needed, in a moment of decision, at the cusp of change, in the stillness between grief and healing. No one could seek it, not directly. It came like a memory, when the heart was honest enough to be seen. Those who found it described it differently. To some, It looked gnarled and dark, with ember-like leaves that hissed when touched. To others, it shimmered like a prism in moonlight, its bark alive with movement. All agreed on one thing. When they stood before it, they felt seen completely, unapologetically. And though it showed them their deepest truths, it judged nothing. Yggdrasil's gift was not comfort. It was clarity. And in that clarity, many chose new paths. Some returned home with a softness that hadn't been there before. Some left everything behind and walked toward the unknown. A few disappeared altogether, becoming stories that shaped songs, carved into the winds, remembered by trees. Meanwhile, the balance among the three great trees continued to deepen. Yggdrasil the Elder stood as the eternal witness, its branches now heavy with stars that hummed with dreams. Yggdrasil the Rememberer grew ever wider, its roots cradling old memories like sacred soil, its bark etched with ever-changing lines that recorded the lives of those who lived fully and loved deeply. And Yggdrasil the Willing rose in delicate curves, each leaf catching light in a way that reminded everyone watching that growth could be elegant and fierce. From time to time, the trees would synchronize a moment when wind would pass through all three at once. A ripple, a breath, a subtle alignment that only the truly still could feel. In those moments, animals paused, songs hushed, and in the silence, stories rewrote themselves. The well of word unbound, at the center of their joining, now shone with a quiet glow even in darkness. Its edges expanded slightly, but never overflowed. And from within it, a new kind of water began to emerge, golden at dawn, silver at night. Not wet, not heavy, but thick with meaning. Those who touched it found that forgotten languages returned to their tongues, not just of speech, but of gesture, memory, movement. People began weaving again, not just cloth, but meaning. They braided intentions into fabric, carved feelings into stone. They danced not for celebration alone, but as invocation of peace, of change, of truth. The 9 realms began to blur less, not because they were separated, but because they had learned to coexist without conflict. In this new era, no gods returned. But some said the gods were never gone. They had simply transformed into trees, into rivers, into songs sung by children with no knowledge of war, into the quiet that settles after a long sorrow has finally been spoken aloud. Somewhere, high in the canopy of Yggdrasil, another flower began to open. It was unlike the others. It shimmered only in reflection, like moonlight seen in a pool. It didn't hum, it didn't pulse. It simply waited. Its petals curled outward like pages turning themselves, revealing a center that was not light, not darkness, but a mirror. Those who dreamed of it awoke, changed. They no longer asked, "What is the purpose of this world?" They asked, "What is the purpose of my presence in it?" And the world answered, not in words, but in roots, in rain, in resonance, in the stillness that followed the blooming of the mirror flower atop Yggdrasil. The world began to settle into a new kind of rhythm, not one bound by survival or prophecy, but by listening. Deep listening, the kind that comes only after long silence and many questions. The mirror flower did not shimmer with light, nor cast reflections in the way a pool might. Its surface bent perception inward. Those who dreamed of it did not see the world. They saw themselves not as they were, but as they were becoming, as they might be. if all fear were set aside. Its name was never spoken aloud. It simply became known as the reflection. The stories that spread across the 9 realms in those days were unlike the epics of old. They did not begin with heroes or end in battles. They began in quiet places, in a child's question, in a stranger's kindness, in a single moment of courage, so small it might have gone unnoticed, if not for the way the trees listened to it. Yggdrasil, Mingrasil, and Indrasil each responded to these stories in their own way. Yggdrasil's bark grew smoother, cracks healed. The scars of Ragnarok did not vanish, but softened, as if forgiven. Mingrasil's leaves turned from green to gold in the wind, not to die, but to carry stories on their fall. They would land at doorsteps, in the hands of elders, at the feet of wanderers. When held, the leaf would hum softly, and the bearer would remember something true about themselves. Yggdrasil began to glow faintly at dusk, a low warmth, like the breath of a fire not yet lit. Those who stood in its light found they could speak truths they had hidden, not because they were ready, but because the world around them was. And beneath all 3, the well of word unbound deepened. Its center now held a spiral, not of water, not of stone, but of pure motion. Looking into it was not like looking down, it was like falling upward. Those who drank from the well didn't gain visions, they gained choice. A choice that felt like a door swinging open not before them, but within them. Yggdrasil, the wild and wandering tree of sparks and shadows, continued to appear at thresholds, not of place of change. A soldier laying down his blade, a mother releasing grief, a child forgiving their own heart. The tree would appear, stay unseen, and vanish again, leaving behind only a single fallen branch that smelled of fire and dew. And still the story did not end. A new kind of gathering began to form. Not councils, not courts, but circles. Circles of song, of silence, of remembrance. People came not to teach or to lead, but to share. A stone passed from hand to hand, a story placed in its weight, and as it moved, it grew heavier with meaning and lighter with peace. In these circles, no one claimed truth. They only offered it. And in that offering, a new form of magic arose. Not the kind that bent nature or summoned storms, but the magic of understanding. The kind that opens without tearing, that heals without hiding. It was in one such circle, beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, that a young girl no older than 7 stood up and asked, "Will the trees ever stop growing?" The circle was quiet. Then a voice no one knew whose replied, "No, because we are still becoming." And that was enough. The world didn't need endings anymore, only new roots. By the time the girl's question echoed beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, the answer had already rippled across the 9 realms. "We are still becoming," was not simply a reply. It became a rhythm. A quiet mantra that passed from breath to breath, etched into songs, woven into garments, whispered into the ears of sleeping children, and carried on the backs of birds that flew between the branches of the world trees. The realms were no longer separate in the way they once had been. The barriers that had once defined them of fire, frost, light, dark, life, and death had dissolved into a greater unity. Now they touched gently, like pages in a well-loved book, no longer colliding, simply continuing. Yggdrasil stood taller than ever, yet lighter. The old ash no longer bore the weight of prophecy, nor the burden of destiny. Its canopy, now formed a dome of stars, a celestial archive where every act of courage, kindness, forgiveness, and love became constellations, not legends, but reminders. Yggdrasil, whose golden leaves had once carried the memory of the past, now began to bloom silver blossoms, each one pulsing softly with the light of dreams never spoken aloud. They were the unformed wishes, the silent longings, the what-ifs and maybes that had once gone unanswered. Now, they were held gently, not to be fulfilled, but to be honored. And Yggdrasil, ever reaching, now bore fruit. Small, round, glowing softly in shades of gold, green, and blue. These fruits did not feed hunger. They fed insight. Those who ate of them saw not visions but clarity. Of their path, of their pain, of their power. Some cried, some laughed. All stood a little taller after. The world no longer needed kings or gods, nor prophets, nor heroes. It needed only rememberers. And remember it did. The rivers whispered the names of those who had made peace. The winds sang of those who had turned away from violence. The mountains murmured the stories of those who had stood still when it mattered most. Even the stars joined in. The three rememberings in the sky, the constellations born of the braided flowers, began to move in ways no one had predicted. They did not orbit. They danced, slowly, eternally. A spiral not toward an end, but toward depth. And in the center of the three trees, beneath the well of word unbound, something new began to grow. Not a tree, not a shrine, not a person, but a space, a clearing, a place where nothing had been placed, so everything could arrive. Those who stood in it described the feeling as invitation. It had no walls, no name. But when you entered, something shifted. You remembered who you were before you were afraid. You remembered who you were before you were told who to be. You remembered that you were never alone. Some called this space Erwin's heart, though her name had become more of a presence than a person by now. And every now and then, people said they saw her, just for a blink, a flicker of white hair in the wind, a figure stepping into a doorway made of trees and never returning. They did not chase her. They only smiled, because they knew she was still walking, and the path she carved was not behind her. It was beneath their feet. The nine realms, once held together by tension and prophecy, now existed like threads in a tapestry woven not by fate, but by choice. And through them, from root to crown, breath to silence, the song of the trees continued. Not loud, not constant, but always there, like a heartbeat beneath creation. The world no longer asked, "What comes next?" It simply asked, "What do we create now?" Yggdrasil still stood as the elder, its branches now silver-tipped with stardust, its trunk engraved by time itself. The scars of past worlds remained visible, but no longer bled. They were sacred now, not reminders of loss, but of growth, of survival, of becoming. Yggdrasil, the rememberer, glowed more softly now. Its leaves hummed like lullabies. People came there to sit, to rest, to let go. They left stories in the bark songs, poems, drawings, laughter, all of it accepted, all of it transformed into petals that fell gently to the soil, becoming nourishment for something more. Yggdrasil, youngest and most tender, was now the most visited of the three. Its fruits continued to ripen, and new branches spiraled outward, reaching toward unknown futures. Children climbed its limbs and saw visions in the sky that hadn't yet happened. Not predictions, but invitations. And Yggdrasil, the wild, wandering tree of shadows and sparks, kept appearing at thresholds, always moving, always mysterious. It whispered to those on the edge, the ones ready to leap, to shed, to surrender. Not all followed its call, but those who did returned lighter. The well of word unbound, now glowing with colors never seen before, began to pulse, not just with memory or choice, but with wonder. At the center of the clearing beneath the trees, the space once called Erwin's heart had transformed. Now a circle of living light. It reflected nothing, yet revealed everything. When you entered it, you didn't hear voices or see visions. You heard your own soul clearly. And that, in the end, was the true gift. Because the world no longer needed to be saved. It only needed to be seen. And in that seeing, something vast awoke. Not a god, not a force, just life, aware of itself. And it spoke not in words, but in presence. Not to command, but to ask, "Will you walk with me?" And across the realms, in every grove, under every sky, within every heart, the answer came. A quiet, open, wholehearted yes. And so, the trees still stand. Yggdrasil, ancient and wise. Yggdrasil, gentle and remembering. Yggdrasil, ever becoming. Yggdrasil, the mystery between light and shadow. They don't demand to be worshipped. They only ask that we listen, that we grow, that we remember who we are and who we can choose to be. Thank you for walking this story with me. May your dreams be deep, your rest be peaceful, and may you always hear the trees whispering you home.